definitely comments and stuff that like nothing to answer to. Just I mean, I think there was one thing you wanted to bring up again too, right?
Um,
With Ovid before we move on.
no, I don't think so. Most of anything that we would have wanted to say, we said, like in the video. There's really nothing else that we could really say beyond what we already did. We don't, like, we're not getting any more comments or anything like that since then.
No,
Um,
it's mostly been like nicer of people like, okay, I get your point now.
yeah. And so that's all we could ever want. And so that's all good.
Yeah.
Um, oh yeah, I was going to talk about the Percy Jackson book that was announced.
Oh yeah.
Before I forget, he announced the new Nico and Will book that is called The Court of the Dead,
Yes.
and and like I'm laughing because the 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 blog thing he put out was talking about Hazel and
Mhm.
talking about changing things at Camp Jupiter. And that's very much in line with what's going on in that book. It's like I really like the description overall. Is talking about like that I don't even know what this is because I haven't read like the first book, but it's talking about because of what Nico and Will did that they that monsters are realizing that they don't have to be bad.
Mhm.
And so they're like, "Oh, what if we're just like not bad?" And so they're like showing up at Camp Jupiter and they're not like bad, they're just there. And
Yeah.
so the kids are like trying to protect them from whoever is like behind who starts attacking them again. And they just said that it's somebody that they've already dealt with before. That could be like so many different people, but I just love that general idea of not only like the monsters being essentially refugees at like their camp that is just like there with them.
Mhm.
Um, but I also love just the general idea. This is why I like Percy Jackson stuff is that the uh, like the whole idea of like Percy kind of setting an example of sorts by asking the gods to instead of giving him unlimited power to help everybody else. That's ever since he did that in the Last Olympian, all the other books you can see like the other kids being affected by that and wanting to do something else too.
Mhm.
And so this is an example of that. Like the whole reason why Will and Nico even went to Tartarus in the first place was to help Bob, who is somebody that was because they wanted to help him after what happened with Percy and Annabeth when they were down there and they had to leave him behind. And so it's just another way of like that, like sort of empathy for people, any people, um, and it causing like a positive effect in the world. It's like, yeah, these monsters would never have realized that they had a choice, that they didn't have to act this way if they don't really want to, without Percy doing something like that first. And
Yeah.
that's like the great part about that sort of a story is that you never know. Like you honestly, it sounds like really corny, but it's honestly the truth that I've seen from like my own life is that you never know like how the things that you say or do will like affect other people. Like
Mhm.
I have mentioned before that I was no contact with my mom and now we talk again. Never in a million years did I ever think that I would ever talk with her again or that we would have a good relationship or have a relationship at all like the one we have right now. And
Yeah.
so like me doing that like made her have that reaction. Like yeah, it took a couple years, but like who cares? She got there. I don't care how long it took her to get there. And so I wasn't thinking about that when I did that. Like I wasn't thinking like maybe my mom will like figure shit out or whatever. She did anyway. I was doing that just because it was the right thing for me to do.
Mhm.
And it's like caused this whole like reaction in a way within like people in my family. And so that's yeah, that's actually how that stuff happens. So that was cool to see that. And Hazel is in the book, and Hazel is the best. Everybody likes Hazel. Like I would, what is wrong with you if you don't like Hazel? And like one funny thing about Hazel that I wanted to quick bring up because of the whole like Ovid thing about like Roman versus like Greek
Yeah.
mythology is that Hazel is Nico's sister. Everyone calls her Nico's sister, but she's like from like the Roman side of Hades. Nobody cares about that. Everyone calls them brother and sister from the like the get go. Like, and actually in the Heroes of Olympus books, um, Nico is the only one that knows about Camp Jupiter before anyone else does. Like he like meets Percy when Percy doesn't remember who he is, and then shows and then when Percy remembers everything, he's like, "What was that? Like why did you act like you don't know me? Or like what are you doing here? How do you know about this camp that nobody else knows about?"
Yeah.
And so it like so he's like hanging out there and like and has like Hazel as a sister and stuff. Nobody at that camp is like, you can't be here because you're because you're Greek. She's not really your sister. It's like, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know too much about Hazel because I haven't read the Heroes of Olympus story for our watchers. I've only read the first five, and don't even remember those as I'm re-remembering as we're reading. But it feels like Rick has been building towards this concept that the monsters aren't necessarily the monsters since the very beginning. We see that like pretty much from Titan's Curse, I would even say, but arguably some of the conversations that Percy has with monsters early on are more nuanced than one might expect. And so, and I'm trying not to like put the show onto it because I can't remember how the Medusa interaction goes in the book necessarily. I feel like they hit some of the same points. It's definitely better in the show, but like there was still a little hints of Rick eventually getting there of, you know, like these monsters are technically these kids' siblings in some cases or half siblings. And like we're just treating them different because of their species, and that's not really what we want to teach people.
Yeah, and like the best example, of course, is Tyson
Yes.
in Sea of Monsters. Like that's really where he like makes it very known what his opinion is about that in a very good way. That like Tyson is treated horribly. They're talking about wanting to take him out and like chase him down in the woods and like hunt him. And the only reason they think that he's bad is because of just what he is, that he's a Cyclops. Because there's nothing actually about him that would make him bad. The only thing that people know about him is that he broke into camp to save Percy's life. And that he was so desperate to save him that they like let him in. Even the person most terrified of Cyclops let him in, Annabeth, because she could tell that he just wanted to help Percy. And so if that's all you know about him and your response is like, I want to take him out into the woods and kill him because he's a Cyclops, it's like, okay, well, you obviously just think that way because you think that because he's a monster, it means that he's bad. And like that book very much sets up him and even like Polyphemus as like, they're not like that, like they're bad, I guess, but not really. Like they just, sometimes they just had no choice. Like when people show up and are trying to hurt them, then what are they supposed to do? And like, and that's always like the kind of perspective of Percy Jackson books that I enjoy when they talk about like the heroes and stuff. That the heroes of the olden times wanted to go out and hurt these monsters to like feel cool or like look cool or like feel like kiss ass to the gods or whatever other reason they wanted to. But in this book series, they're like, I don't want to do that. And so like the monsters are, you even feel bad for the monsters that are on Luke's ship, because you're like, what is he doing to them? Or like, are they okay when they're there? Like they're doing horrible things, but you just like genuinely wonder what's going on with them when he's with them, because it's not like he actually cares about any of them.
Yeah. Well, and so with the idea with the monsters too, and this is going back to what mythology really is. It's just like part of me has to wonder where the idea of monsters came from. Like, was it disabilities? Like, that's kind of the obvious, you know, did people see there's people that look different and what are they? And this makes me scared and nervous. Like, you know, those very basic human emotions when you don't know something. That's almost what it feels like monsters are. And so for him to take that metaphor and then turn it into like, let's make this nuanced. Let's see, you know, these people have been being mean to them and going after them their entire lives for seemingly no reason. Sometimes they're just minding their own business like Medusa. And then we send these heroes after them. It's giving. I've said this on this podcast before, that in our dysfunctional families, a lot of times people will make the kids in the different roles fight each other, not like literally, but it's very much setting a competition up. And that's almost what this is giving. Is like, yeah, these are your siblings, your cousins, etc. But you're in competition because you guys look different. You have different skills. You have different abilities. And so, yeah, fight it out. Duke it out to the death. Let's see who wins.
Yeah, it's honestly the best example of the thing that people talk a lot about, especially right now with like the world and politics and billionaires, is that the people in charge, like the billionaires, they like to see, they would rather have us fighting each other instead of like fighting them. And so this is like an example of that, of like the monsters and the demigods just like fight each other instead of them both turning around and being like, what about you guys? Like, what are you guys doing? And and so like the Percy Jackson books have kind of had that like overall idea for like throughout, like honestly since like the first book on. But now enough of the story has gone by that they can kind of, that Rick can kind of have a story like this that's more like in your face about it, especially with characters like Nico and Hazel, who and Frank, um, that are all, and Will for that matter, that are all like very empathetic characters, but like, you know, Nico and Hazel are both like Hades kids that are kind of seen as like stereotypically like the bad ones, but they're not at all. And like that's a lot of like Nico's story, is like recognizing that about himself. And so they are the perfect people that would kind of decide like, yeah, let's do this. Let's keep monsters safe. Let's be fighting people to keep monsters safe in this book because people are trying to hurt them when they haven't done anything wrong. Um, they would be the ones to do something like that.
Yeah, Nico's introduction to being a demigod, because we did read that already, was so. Nico's introduction to being a demigod was so crazy when you think about it, that like him having this empathy for the monsters does make sense. I mean, we didn't see too much of the development of his early days because Percy was literally gone. But what we do know is that this kid figured out he was a Hades kid before anyone else did, probably. That's at least the implication in that last scene where he just disappears. And like, I have to wonder how much this kid heard people talking about the prophecy, the big three. Nobody suspected there was a Hades kid, so who knows what they may have said about the possibility of a Hades kid when it comes to big three kids. Plus, he had that whole like running away mad because of his sister dying. Like there was definitely a bit of a redemption arc for him, is what I'm getting at. And
Yeah.
so for him to be a person saving villains, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I can't remember this for sure, but I feel like there is a thing in the books about Hades even having like a cabin at camp. I can't remember if they
I'm
have
pretty
one
sure
or
he
not.
does.
But there is like, I can't remember how that comes up, but I remember that something with that comes up where like Nico never really stays at camp like everybody else does. He doesn't really feel like he like fits in and things like that, so he doesn't really ever stay there even after things are okay. He doesn't stay there like everybody else. And so it is like a whole thing with that of like they kind of are like the scapegoat for lack of a better word of for like the gods, like Hades, like the first book like makes that point that people just assume that he's the bad one and doing all these bad things just because that's like his like reputation because of what other people say about him basically. um but that's not what he's actually like or anything like that. And so that's a lot of what these characters have gone through already. Hazel is, you know, also a Hades kid. Frank is like this big, strong, like tough looking guy who's a Aries, like on uh, the Roman side, but still an Aries kid.
Mars.
But he is a super duper empathetic person, like the most caring, loving child, who would like never hurt anybody ever. Um, And so he's like flies in the face of what you expect him to be at all times. Um, and so that's what makes his character interesting too. And so yeah, these people would do something like that. And so it's fun to see them, to see Rick and Mark or Shiro be able to like experiment with things like this in this universe and just see how people would respond, because Percy would love something like this happening.
Yeah, Percy would definitely welcome it after what he went through in Sea of Monsters in particular.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's see. So, show news. I know I've seen a little bit more content with Walker recently.
Yeah, just people posting an interview from the when he won that award at the Savannah School of Art and Design,
Mhm.
which the thing that we talked about him like having like the two like identity things,
Mhm.
and you could see that in that interview too, where he was talking about how he's never seen The Godfather and that he pretends like he's seen it when he's around his actor friends so that they don't yell at him
Yep.
about never seeing the movie. And I was like, I've never seen that movie either because everybody told me to watch it, and so I didn't because you're annoying me. Like,
Very thing. Like I've
yeah.
never seen it. It's not. I just like don't have any motivation to get around to it. Like I know it's a thing. I know I haven't seen it. I know it's huge among film people, but I just can't motivate myself to sit down and watch it. I just don't love mob movies.
Yeah, whenever like hashtag film bros are like, you have to watch this movie because it's the epitome of film, like they do with The Godfather, and there's other movies like that they do that with. I'm like, I will never watch this movie just to piss you off, because no, I don't want to watch it. So I love that the child also has never seen the movie because he's probably like, I don't care. Like
Yeah.
everyone says that it's good, but I don't want to watch this 3 hour like epic movie about gangsters. Um, I can just watch it through memes because who cares? There's a million other movies to watch that are probably better, honestly, than The Godfather at this point. That's like, can we move on from that movie? Oh my god. But either way, like when he said that, he was like, "Oh right, but the kids at like what he called real life." He's like, in real life, those my friends at school like don't care about that. The way he put it was like, they're not mean to me about that. And I was just like, okay. That's like one obvious way of like, oh right, I have to pretend like I like this movie around my actor friends, but nobody else cares about that.
Yeah.
No, no one else would care about that. No.
Yeah, so there's still interview stuff coming out. I know Leah won the NAACP. She was what was the best female actor, or I don't know if it was like a child category specifically, but she won something on that for supporting actress.
Yeah, and her and Dior went to a Black Excellence brunch that Disney did at the end of February for Black History Month. Um, and March 15th is when the Child Emmys, the children's TV show and Emmys, has their award ceremony where they're nominated 5 billion times.
Yeah.
And so that's like the next big award thing for them to come up with. And Leah is nominated for that too, for acting, and everyone else in the world is nominated for everything else. The main thing is just, did this happen when we did the last episode about them I don't think so. About them officially starting to write Titan's Curse.
I don't think so either. Yeah, so they're sitting in the writers' room. Rick was very careful to put in his what do you call blue sky?
I don't even know. I've been calling them tweets because I don't know what to call them.
Yeah, but on his blue sky, when he was talking about the writers' room and how this first session went, he was very careful to say it has still not been greenlit. We're just talking about what would happen if we did it, because they're now currently editing the footage from season 2, so they have to keep that kind of stuff in mind. And for a lot of us, this is like, please just announce it soon. I know they're probably going to wait maybe until at least it comes out, or, at least until we have a date for season 2. But it's just so much of us are anxious about Titan's Curse because that's that's the hard hitting one. That's when it gets dark. That's when we get the emotional appeal. And we know Leah's gonna kill it. We know Charlie's gonna kill it. We know all of them are going to do great. Like even Charlie, I'm looking forward to in Titan's Curse.
Yeah, he's gonna be a fucking menace during that season in like the best possible way.
Yeah.
Like Luke, people like me that are always talking about how horrible he is, we're having a field day. And that field day will like continue for at least the next 2 years about Titan's Curse of just reminding people like, hey, do you remember that Luke does this in this book? Do you remember that his entire storyline is that he's torturing Annabeth? That's literally all he does. And also tortures Thalia, like
Yep.
mentally. That's all he does in that book. And then his storyline's over. Goodbye. Like that's literally that's all he does. And that's all he does in that entire season. Um but so it's funny because I remember probably like a month or so ago I said something about how they're probably like Rick is probably outlining Titan's Curse right now because they usually start writing or start the process of writing the next season a little bit after the season that they just finished stops filming because it just takes a while to figure all that stuff out. And like it like gives me anxiety and also excitement at the same time to imagine them trying to figure out how to do this season because I'm not gonna like let's like not be like stupid about this. Like literally as soon as they announced that they were making a TV show of Percy Jackson and that Rick Riordan wasn't very involved and that everything would actually be like accurate, everyone has been waiting for this season. Everyone has been waiting for Titan's Curse. Like we love the first two books, but everyone is dying to watch this season. Everyone's been waiting. Like give it to me. Just give it to me. Just like finally get there so we can get this like book on a TV show and have it done by people that know what they're doing extremely well and absolutely rip our hearts out because this is like the book where everything is just so much more serious and in a way where just like other books have serious moments but you really like can't go back like even the way that like in Sea of Monsters that you think that Tyson is dead and then he ends up being okay at the end that like messes with you when you're reading Titan's Curse because I remember the first time that I read it I thought that Bianca would show up at camp and that she would be there at the end and they the way that they talk about her the whole rest of that book is setting is like he knows that and so it's even more devastating when you get back to camp and Nico says I know that she's dead because I felt her die and I remember the first time I read that book just like staring off at the wall for like 20 minutes afterwards realizing like oh she's actually dead and she's never coming back. I did not even think that that was an option. And like somehow that has happened. Did I just read a 13-year-old girl being electrocuted to death? Like actually she's 12. But yeah, I did. And I was just like, holy Jesus, that's like a lot more serious than I thought. And so they started the writers have started like writing the season. It's really exciting to know that for sure. Like the last month or so, whenever Rick would say something about like, oh, I'm trying to write, but it's hard to find motivation considering like everything that's
Yes.
going on right now. I was like, you're writing something to do with Titan's Curse. Like I know you are, because that's the thing that you would be writing right now. And yeah, that's what he's writing right now. And so it's either way, it's made everybody get really excited and then also make us think about like, oh, what is this stuff actually gonna be like when it's on screen? Like in the book it's already interesting enough, but like now that we know it's likely going to happen, like even if they don't announce it officially for like many months, it's hard for me to believe that Disney would just be like, no, number one TV show of 2024, I want you to stop after season 2 and like stop before the season that would get a lot of people interested into the show that haven't like watched it yet because of how serious it is. People always like seasons like that. Like people still like I still like the Prisoner of Azkaban book for like Harry Potter in the same sort of way, except this is way better than that book obviously, but it's like similar enough where like that's the book where like things progress a lot, things are much more serious. Like in season 2 of like Harry Potter, there's like a random snake chasing them around, and then in season 3 it's like, oh, the guy who murdered my parents got let out of prison,
And the
and
guy
these
who
things
was
that are, and I'm like remembering hearing my mother screaming as she's being murdered in my head whenever these things are showing up at my school, and I can't like figure out how to make myself stop hearing my mother being murdered. Like that's like such a like a big jump in that way. And so this is that season, but even more so.
yeah,
Um,
'cause it's like before you read this season, you're like, kids can die in this series.
and kids will die. That's like the thing about this book series for people
Yeah.
that haven't read the books or just don't know that I genuinely hope that there's a lot of like families and things like that that watch Titan's Curse one day when it's out that don't know like what happens to Bianca and even what happens to Annabeth, but like especially what happens to Bianca that they don't know, and then have to like sit there and be like a 12-year-old just was murdered on screen and nobody can save her. Like she's one of her dad is one of the most powerful gods, but he wasn't able to save her. Like they just have to deal with that she's just gone, and that's not even counting everything else that happens in that season. Like my head might explode watching like how Thalia talks to Percy for an entire season. And that is one of those things that is interesting about Thalia is that people it's easier for people to just like her, but when you reread that book, as especially as you get older and you read what she says to him, you're like, Jesus Christ. Oh,
Yeah.
like God. And seeing her be like that with him is going to be like hard, but it's part of like it has to happen that way because it's part of the storyline of how things happen in that book, and it's Percy's whole story that he's just scapegoated aggressively so in that season because by that point Luke is like taking, Kronos in his little bitchy little body. And so people have like started less being like we can save him except for Annabeth, and a little bit Thalia, but most other people aren't really saying that as much anymore.
Yeah.
But it's also just like the thing like filming wise to me that is interesting is that there's only a couple months between Sea of Monsters and Titan's Curse. Titan's Curse happens in the winter time,
Mhm.
and so they don't need to wait as long to film again.
Yeah.
They could start filming much sooner, because of that they don't have to wait until like June or July or August or whatever. They could start filming in like February or March because that would actually fit like the kind of theme anyway of that season because it is all in the winter time. It's
Mhm.
cold, it's snowing. They're like trying to figure out how to not freeze when they're out on the road and they don't have anybody to help them. Um, and like homeless Apollo shows up and helps them and breaks the rules, but um, there's that's a whole other thing too that is just like a more kind of like depressing, even just like aesthetic look to it all. And that it's only a couple months after the last book, so I don't think that they're gonna wait that long with this season especially to start doing it again.
Yeah.
Um, which is like a lot because it's going to be a lot for everybody involved. Like we said, like Annabeth's storyline is that she gets kidnapped and then tortured by the person that she thought would be her brother that would always take care of her for the rest of her life, that is now trying to kill her and her friends, and then he emotionally manipulates her. The thing I said the other day on TikTok was I cannot wait for the people who are like, but Luke was traumatized to have to watch him using his tragic backstory to abuse her, because it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, it's going to be a lot harder to say that because that's his storyline in Titan's Curse is he uses like, oh, but I had a sad life and oh, I am sad, my dad sucks, to get her to start to like find herself trying to protect him while he's torturing her. But
Yeah.
that's how, abusive people do that. And so like her storyline is being tortured in every possible way by the person that she thought would always keep her safe. The person who's keeping her safe is using her empathy to torture her purposefully, like uses it on purpose because he knows that it will like get her to do what he wants her to do, which is be caught by her because he wants to torture her that bad because he and then like and then the other part of his storyline is trying to emotionally manipulate Thalia into either killing Percy for him or giving up her entire life so that he doesn't have to have Kronos in his body anymore. It's like, okay. So that's his entire storyline that whole season. Arian has a little bit better of a storyline, except for the fact that he's just ridiculous about Artemis.
Yeah.
But he still has a better storyline when it comes to this like overly depressing stuff. He's like trying to figure out Pan, but he's kind of like his character isn't. He's kind of there to like be a little bit of a break from all the other stuff that everyone else is going through, but
Yeah.
pretty much everyone else is just going through like severe childhood trauma. Especially Percy. My God. Like his trauma is just it's never ending, obviously, but it's especially never ending in that book. There's like the thing that I saw you sent me was a tweet being like there's never a scene in this entire season where they're happy. And like there isn't. Like the first scene of the entire book is Percy feeling insecure because he's around Annabeth after not seeing her for 3 months when she's been at school with Thalia. He asks Thalia a question about her mother and she rips his head off. And so then he's just like, I'm just gonna stay away from them so that she doesn't have to talk to me because I make her upset by just like existing. And then like 2 minutes later, Annabeth is kidnapped and he's talking and he's trying to convince them to let him up so he can jump off of a cliff and go after her. And they're telling him no. And it just like goes on after that. Like 5 minutes after that is when Thalia blames him for Annabeth being kidnapped. And he's thinking in his head like, yeah, that is my fault. And it's like this season with Percy, if anything, will be the ultimate like example of this is not correct. Like, just so you know, you're being way too hard on yourself. This is what abuse does to people's brains. It makes you feel like you're at fault for everything. And what you can't get any better than Percy sitting there being like, yeah, it is my fault that Annabeth was kidnapped, and it's somehow my fault that Bianca joined Artemis even though I told her to stop. And it's somehow my fault that capture the flag happened even though it's completely Thalia's fault. And then like Dionysus tries to push him off of a skyscraper and says that the sound of him dying would be really fun to listen to.
Yeah. He's just constantly going through trauma that entire book.
And like, well, the thing we wanted to talk about was Artemis, because I was like, oh, that is really interesting to think about them doing a character like that right now, with like the extreme like gender politics that are going on right now, because you can't like completely like make Artemis nicer because it's literally the plot of the book. The whole thing of that, the kind of like ridiculousness of how they treat Percy in that book is that like he is the literal god of the ocean. Like he's the god of the ocean's son, and they're looking for a mystical sea cow, and nobody ever asked him, the child that talks to the sea creatures, if he's seen a mystical sea cow. They never ask him. They never even think, it never even occurs to them that he would know that. And he makes friends with the sea cow, and the sea cow is his best friend in that book, and just like follows him around and is like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, are you all right? Are you okay? And he's like, no, I'm not okay.
It's so ridiculous. They were like, the one demigod we have. We only have one that has anything to do with the sea, but we're looking for a sea monster. Let's take the satyr.
Yeah, like let's not ask him anything at all. Let's never even ask him or bring it up or anything like that. And then get upset with him much later on in the book when he realizes that that's who Bessie is. And it's like, well, nobody ever asked. I talk to sea creatures all the time.
Well, and that's
And
the thing is, I didn't get the impression that everybody knows he's been going on these secret missions to go help sea creatures because he's kind of told very silly, like in the beginning of that book, of just like, yeah, I've been doing this for months now. They keep coming to me. I feel like it's the type of thing that Percy would be like, oh, damn it, okay, I'm gonna go do this, and then he wouldn't say anything to anybody because he's like, this is just part of it, right? Like
yeah,
this is what I'm supposed to do.
yeah, Percy would see it as like, oh, this is just my job. I'm supposed to help these creatures. It's my responsibility to help them
Yeah,
because
like who else
I'm,
is going to? There's no other Poseidon kids.
yeah, and he just like loves all of them, and that's why he gives them like adorable names like Bessie and things like that, because he just, it's like how I talk to animals, honestly. Like I talk to every single animal I see. I will just sit there and talk to them. Like my mom does too. And her boyfriend will like take videos of them when they're on their trips of her just talking to, and I do the same thing. I just sit there and talk to them all the time. And that's
Yeah.
basically what Percy is doing, where he just like likes them and cares about them, so he's going to go and help them because he's a nice empathetic kid. And um but it is like a, the whole story with Artemis is going to be fascinating because she fits a lot of stereotypes. And the thing that is really fun about this book series happening while Trump is president is that it very much like throws in the face like the negative stereotypes that like the right wing side would not like to see themselves in, without making it obvious that they are doing that. But also obvious enough where they can't ignore what they're seeing. Like
Yeah.
it's a good like balancing act. Like Rick does a good job because he's like making a point, but he's not like banging you over the head with like a giant anvil that falls on your head and like knocks you out, because it's so obvious. Like Artemis is this god. It makes sense for her that she would, because of the god that she is, that she would think that men are inherently bad and that women are inherently good just because of their genitals. Like, and that's all she's basing it on. And so that's very much like what turfs are like now. And so I always think about like, would she like trans people? And it's like, no, she
Well,
wouldn't.
and Rick could go either way with that, right? Because I could see Rick being like, you know what, things are too volatile right now. I'm going to have her canonically like a trans person so that, I can say, even in this version. But I could see him also doing the opposite to make her an example.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. It could go either way. Rick likes to do it. He likes to switch it up sometimes with how he.
And especially when you consider that for this book series slash TV show, the gods are always the one in the wrong,
Mhm.
that she would be the one to kind of play that part because it's fine for her to do that. And that is because she's the god and she's the one that is seen as in the wrong. She can be the one that is in the wrong because she's an all-powerful god. The other kids will be like would be hurt more if they were the ones that kind of showed that. And even in like the general storyline of Titan's Curse, Zoe starts off the book not liking Percy at all just because he's a boy, and then by the end of the book she's like, oh, you're a great person,
Mhm.
and you're crying about her dying, which is going to be, geez, I don't want to think about that right now. About having to like I when like people talk about like Nico being cast, and like yes, that child when Nico is cast will be like an emotional like event for everybody, but the like emotional event for me especially will be like when they cast who Zoe is, like being like, oh my, I'm gonna love you so much and I'm gonna have to watch you die and I'm gonna be really really upset about it. Like I don't want to watch this happen. And
Yeah.
but we obviously have to. But even in the original story, Zoe changes her mind because she gets to know Percy, and she
Yeah.
realizes like, oh, you're a nice person. But like Artemis, because she's like this rigid sort of god that doesn't have like, even Zoe, who's been alive for thousands of years, is able to like still tap into like some of that leftover like humanity, I guess is the only word I can think of for that.
Mhm.
And get to know Percy and be like, oh, he is actually a good person and he isn't less than because he's a guy, and we should have had him on the quest from the beginning. Maybe Bianca would still be alive if he was, and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, she realizes that she made a mistake, and Artemis would never like admit something like that. Like she does stand up for him the other part of this season is that at the very end of the book, it ends with all the gods voting on whether they should kill him,
Yeah.
and Athena votes yes.
Yeah,
Oh my
we'll
god.
get to that, of course, but
Jesus Christ. But like with just Artemis fits a lot of stereotypes of like kind of not
yeah.
only straight up turfs, but women who don't think they are turfs. There's a lot like every Calypso fan is like that like gets mad at me in comments, and I eventually just like start deleting their comments after a couple days. And they end up calling me a misogynist. They all call me a misogynist at a certain point. Um, those girls are like on the line of becoming a turf, and they don't even understand that they are, because in the reason why they think that I'm a misogynist is because when I talk about Calypso, I point out that she is the abusive one in that situation, and they look at Percy, a literal 14-year-old child, and they think that he has to be the abusive one, the bad one, the one that is hurting the woman, purely because he's a boy.
Mhm.
That's literally all it is that because he's a boy, he has to be the one and she has to be the victim. And they can't even notice in a situation like that when it's so obvious that that's not what's going on here. They still can't see it because they're stuck in like those gender roles that they just assume that like the guy has to be the bad one and the girl has to be the victim. And even when it's very obviously not that way, they still can't see it. And so there's a lot of like white women particularly that are like kind of teetering that line, and like right now is a time when a lot of those people may like fall over the edge. Like the whole Blake Lively situation is a really good example of that. Like, by the way, like we don't like Ryan Reynolds at all, but these are like rooted in reality reasons. I don't like that they use their children as pawns for PR and marketing, and I don't like the stories about him, like how he treats child actors on sets, and I don't like the idea that somebody like that in Hollywood can just like roam around and do whatever he wants. And it makes me nervous about things that we don't know about. That's not any of this other insane just shenanigans that we've watched happen over since like last August. But it's just like you can see people kind of towing that line, and that's what I mean by like they could show Artemis and even the other hunters as kind of like making people uncomfortable by like seeing themselves in a way that they don't like, because it's one of those things of like it's very obvious when you're reading the book and then when they would be watching the TV show that the hunters are like not in the right for how they're treating Percy. Like it's very like you care about Percy. You know that he should be on the quest to go save like Annabeth's life. And and so there's no real reason you can think of why they wouldn't bring him, besides that they just don't want to bring him because he's a boy. That's literally the only reason why they don't bring him. Because like you would think that after the last like two quests that you would want him to go on this quest because the other two were successful, and the one time that Thalia was out there, she ended up being turned into a tree and died. And so it's like, well, he can handle this stuff, and he knows the people involved. He's been involved with Luke and Annabeth for years, last couple years, so he would know how to handle this stuff better, you would think. But they just say like, no, Thalia's coming, even though Thalia hates the
Yeah, it's like
hunters.
we hate her, but at least she's a girl.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, she's a girl, so I guess she can come, and it's like, okay. Um, but it's just like it's a good story that way where it kind of makes people see things that makes them uncomfortable in a way that is like not obvious but is obvious enough where when they would watch it they wouldn't like it, and they would be trying to come up with reasons, other reasons for why they don't like it. And it's like, no, you just don't like this because you don't like seeing yourself in this. It's like when fascisty people watch Star Wars and they don't like that they're like the Empire, and it's like, riddle me that. But it's like it's that sort of thing, and that's when they start being like, I don't like this movie because the bombs fall in space the wrong way, and it's like, no, you don't like this movie because it's calling you, specifically you, out. And like Luke is also like a storyline like that as well. Like he's the lone like school shooter guy that came from a fine family. Yeah, he went through some stuff when he was, like a kid, but considering everyone has gone through stuff. Like literally everyone. Everyone has like the most traumatic childhood you can possibly
Yeah,
ever imagine in this book
there's
series.
a famous mass shooter that like reminds me of Luke. Now that you said this, I don't remember the name, but do you remember it was a guy and he was mildly attractive, I would say. And he had a whole manifesto about how he couldn't get girlfriends or something like that. I want to say he was in Southern California or somewhere close to me even.
I think I know what school shooting that was. I think that was one of the
I
ones
don't
that
think, was it
happened.
a school even? I can't remember. It might have been a college, but he was older. He wasn't high school age, if I
Oh, I
remember.
remember that. That happened. I remember when that happened. And yeah, it was a college in Southern California, and he had like entire YouTube videos that he posted online talking about how like nobody wanted to date him and nobody liked him, and he like got in his car and just started like shooting people on the street when he was driving down the street and
Mhm.
things like that. But that is like the Luke character is an also very like abrupt way to show kind of the the people that are doing this kind of stuff, like what happens to them, because like yeah,
I
I
feel
guess you can sit there and be like, yeah, Luke had some not so nice things that happened in his childhood, but it's like, does that justify him torturing somebody who used to look up to him and
yeah.
thought that he would help her, and does that help him torturing Thalia or trying to convince them to kill Percy for him
Well,
because he
yeah,
can't do it himself?
you brought this up with the Luke defenders in a recent video that when people like us see that have trauma, that have asked ourselves a million times, does my abuser's trauma matter in this situation? Am I being too hard by holding them responsible because they have trauma too? And like we all go through that phase, right? Like I'm sure you've even thought it of your dad, and your dad did some really terrible shit.
Mm-hmm.
But like it's hard not to do that. And then you have people saying, well, okay, but Luke was traumatized. That's why he killed a bunch of people.
Yeah, and like I was just talking about this with a friend today. Hi, Ashley. If you ever watch this, we were just talking about this earlier about Luke stuff. Um, and what I was saying was that like my so just like to talk about like my own dad for a second, just to give an example of why I just don't care about any of that. I will like explain to for people why I think Luke is the way that he is because people talk about it, and so I just talk about it to like give a reason basically, but I don't actually care about that reason. Actually, I would rather not talk about it. And the reason I say that is my dad was very extremely abusive, and um when when I was a kid, the entire time all of that stuff was going on, and it was like the absolute worst of the quote unquote stuff was from like when I was 6 to when I was 12. That was like the worst time. Um, and that entire time, he had a therapist
Oh
that
my
he
god.
saw weekly. When I went to therapy when I was 12 because my mom was like, and my dad were like, she doesn't want to live anymore. They had me go to a therapist in the same office of the therapist that he had. Like, obviously, a very different therapist,
Yeah.
but it was still like somebody in this, and they went to that office because he had been seeing somebody there. And yeah, like he had a therapist, he had a psychiatrist. He was taking. I can remember being. I can remember when I was like 9 or 10 or whatever. I would wake. I would like walk around in the middle of the night when everyone else was asleep, and I would be like sitting in the bathroom just like staring at myself, and I would look at his pill bottles, and I can remember doing that and seeing like Prozac, and like on it he took Prozac for the longest time. He saw a therapist the entire time that that was going on. What did they talk about? Like genuinely, what did they talk about? And so I don't care. I don't care if abusive people also are sad sometimes. You did the worst stuff to other people, so I don't care like if bad things happen to you because that is superseded when you use that to just hurt other people.
Mhm.
And so the thing with like Luke, I try to been like trying to make the point of saying lately is like the thing with Mason, that like the biggest Percy Jackson account that I look at every once in a while just because he's the biggest Percy Jackson account. I know that there are kids that have gone through abuse that watch his videos because there's no way that there isn't for a Percy Jackson book series, and he has so many followers. So I feel like this like weird duty to like watch his videos and then like counteract them when I see him say things that are just like so off. And he did a video recently where he was talking about like trying to defend Luke, and he was talking about like, oh, if you think that Luke is bad because he wanted to, and he's irredeemable, things like that, because he wanted to kill Percy, then wouldn't you say the same thing about the gods? And wouldn't you say the same thing about like Clarice and people like that? And I'm like, that is the
That's the
literal
point.
that
Yeah.
is the literal point of this entire book series, and I am weirded out that you don't seem to understand this in this moment of time. Because that is literally the entire point. The entire point of this book series is that other people like Clarice, or even like characters you don't even know yet, like Ethan Nakamura and people like that, Nico even, they have reasons to be upset with Percy because this world that the gods have set up in isn't an abusive world, and is a world where like these kids are not supposed to get along. They're supposed to fight to prove that they are the best for their abusive parent. Like we talked about how like siblings usually don't get along in abusive families in the exact same sort of way. They would rather us fight with each other and like get everything that they want out of that situation instead of us realizing that we're both mad at them. And so in this book series, like Clarice, yeah, she is mad at Percy for a while. She also has an abusive dad that tries to hit her when he's not even physically there in Sea of Monsters, much less when he is there in person. And so like think about that for a second. If you're gonna like cry about how Luke's dad sucks, like was Luke's dad literally beating him like Clarice's dad probably was, or like Percy's stepdad was for 6 years of his life? Like no, he wasn't. But then also Clarice realizes that Percy is a good person because she gets to know him. He gives her the golden fleece at the end of Sea of Monsters, when it's actually not a good idea for him personally to do that. And he's like, no, it's the right thing for you. This is your quest. You can take this back to camp. I don't care. I don't need to like get everyone like attention and glory and whatever. And that's when she realizes like, oh, Percy is actually a nice person.
Yep.
And he's not actually the like person that I think he is based on just like projections that I feel because I feel competitive with him. And so she doesn't try to hurt him after that. There's a lot of characters like that, like Ethan Nakamura, or even like Chris Rodriguez in like later books. They both like go back, they like actually agree way more with Percy, and they respect him as a character. That happens with a lot of characters in this book series. That never happens with Luke. Every other, even Annabeth, like Annabeth doesn't like Percy at first, and then she gets to know him in the first book, and she like doesn't want to hurt him. In the beginning of the first book, if Luke would have been like, join me, Annabeth would have been like, okay. But then by the time she gets to the end of the book and she's gone through this whole thing with Percy, she isn't going to do that anymore. Yeah. But like Luke knows Percy in like that way. Like he literally like becomes his friend purposefully to try to like kill him. And so he does see Percy's humanity more than anyone else. Percy, when he's like scared and alone and is afraid of everybody at camp and doesn't know what he's doing, and he thinks that his mom is dead and he wants to save her but he doesn't know how, in this like very vulnerable moment, like Luke talks to him in the most vulnerable time really for him in this world, and nothing during any of those interactions make him change his mind. He still does the exact same stuff. And so like it's like, okay, that's literally the point of this book series, is that this world is set up for them to not get along. But Percy doesn't follow the rules of everybody else, so eventually everyone kind of slowly gets to realize that he's not the person they think he is, because he doesn't want like the glory like everyone else is supposed to want from the gods. He doesn't want it. And that makes people like him and realize like, oh, I shouldn't hurt this kid because he's actually a nice person. Except for Luke. Luke never realizes that. And that's like because it's literally just him. It's just him. It's nobody else. It's just him. it's that's why it's like it doesn't matter like why he's like that, because it's like there's never a good enough reason for why somebody would be like that and like hurt the people there were. That's what I figured out with my own dad, that like there was never going to be something that I uncovered about him that like explained all the things that he did to me and everyone else that he ever met in his life, because there's never something you can think of that's bad enough to excuse that sort of behavior. And so it's like I'm not going to spend that much time trying to figure out why Luke is like that. I just know that he is, and that he's the only one who is. Like he's the only one who is so caught up in wanting like the chaos and attention and admiration from his daddy that he can't even see like the humanity of all the other kids around him. And I don't know why that happened, but I just don't care.
Well,
that's just
it,
that's just what
it
happened.
it's 100% turning out to be the thing you set out to be. Just or blah. I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase this. He set out to destroy that mindset in the gods. That demigods are just tools. We're just going to use them. If they break, whatever, we throw them away. He hated that mindset. And yet, here in Titan's Curse, we have him saying, the demigods are tools that the gods use, so I'm taking away their tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're objectifying the demigods in the exact same way you are accusing them of doing in the exact same sentence.
Yeah, like, and that's always the differentiation I try to make with like Luke and what people think when people say like, "Oh, Luke was trying to help the demigods,"
How? Like by
and I was
killing
like,
them? Yeah.
no, or like even when people say like, "Oh, Luke just had a good idea, he just did it the wrong way," and I was like, there is no good way to go on a eugenics filled like genocide campaign, like because that's what happened. Even if you try to say like, oh, Luke was just like turned into that because of like Kronos, he was upset because of the demigods or whatever, and that's why he wanted to go after the gods. And it's like, well, he himself doesn't say that's why he's actually so upset. Like from the kind of the start, the thing that he wanted was like endless kind of admiration,
Mm-hmm.
and he thought that the way to get that was by going on these quests. And then when he went on a quest and he failed, he was like, I'm never going to get this admiration that I want, and so now my life has no meaning. And he literally just like jumped to that and was just like, the gods need to be taken down because they set up this system where this is the only way I can get what I want, and I didn't pass this like ridiculously difficult quest that I like picked for myself and went on it by myself when I didn't have to try to like thinking that I would prove that I was like the best, and nobody and everyone would like remember who I was for like generations on end. And it's like he doesn't have to do that. It's like he's the best example of like he is so angry about like the gods that he is willing to like throw every all the other normal people, the his peers, his people, his community aside if it means that he gets to win. And so like that's always the thing with Luke, is that he's okay with Kronos because it means that he's going to be the one in power. He's going to be the one that gets to decide what to do. He doesn't have an issue with there being people that like have way more power over everybody else. He just has an issue with it not being him. And that's the big distinction, is that all the other kids don't want the gods or anyone to have that much power over anybody's life, because it's obviously not a good idea. It's it causes all these horrible like abusive sort of problems if they do. But like he wants that. He thinks he's that person that thinks like, "Oh, if I just like take it over from the inside, I can like somehow, fix things." But people who say that, they're not ever being honest about that. Like like not to sound like super cynical, but I don't care. Like the politicians that are like, I'm gonna change Washington. No, you're not. Like you're not going to change Washington. Like let's stop. There's no way that you get to the point where you can run for like the United States Congress in any sort of way and actually be like deluded enough to believe something like that. Like by the time you get to that level of politics, you know that that's not going to happen. And
Yeah.
so it's like it's that sort of a thing of being, that's like his pitch to people to get them to join him, but very quickly they realize that that's not actually what's going on here. He just wants to get rid of anybody that doesn't agree with him.
Yeah.
And that's like a whole, his whole story is a very like aggressive sort of like MAGA thing. Because there's a lot of like angsty little people like that out there that think that because something bad happened to them that they deserve to just do whatever they want, or think that they should get things that they want and they haven't gotten them, so it has to be everyone else's fault. And they don't ever stop to think like, why am I so upset? Like, why am I taking out the fact that I'm mad at my dad on literally everyone else on this planet but my dad? Like, why don't you just go yell at Hermes and beat him up or something? Like, I don't know. Go yell at him, talk to him, scream at him, do something at him.
Well, and also, so I don't know how much experience that you have with this because we don't talk about our before times, like unless we get the inspiration for them. Me and Shannon, our before times talk, like before therapy. It's
Yes.
usually like, oh, hey, I suddenly like saw this person on Instagram that I have history with, and here's the history.
Mm-hmm.
So I know when I see the people that I hurt while I was going through it, while I was like in the worst of it, my immediate reaction is not like, well, I was going through it. It's, well, shit, I hurt them. And I feel shitty about it, even if I was going through it.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are certain people that I still cannot bring myself to the humility of apologizing to. We'll talk about it in the DMs, but like there's some of them where it's like I really really want to. I really really want to say I was going through something shitty and I'm sorry for the way I treated you. But that can be humiliating and I get that there's some point where you're like, can I actually go back? But the truth is there's always going back as long as you're alive. Like there really is. And like with the monsters, going back to the book that's new, you can do bad things and come back from it. We don't want to spread this message that like there's no redemption ever, ever, ever. Like maybe certain actions there's no redemption from. I'll give you that. But given you haven't seriously, seriously hurt somebody, I'm talking like SA, murder, things like that, you can come back from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like we are very much people that are talking about that talk about like restorative justice in like an actual way. Like a lot of people talk about that, but they actually don't really like it when they actually have to like actually do it, you know, and deal with it. Like the deluge of videos the last couple days about Kevin Frankie
Oh
is
yeah.
like grating on my last nerve because it's people that are doing that. Like, do you want restorative justice or do you not? This man did not torture his children. He did not do that. He likely did not even know that that was going on. If you don't know why that is, look up Mormon Stories podcast on YouTube. They have literally probably 20 hours of content at this point explaining how Jody isolated those people, especially the men, and why is part of Mormon culture that he wouldn't know. But it's also like even if you don't know that, even if you don't like take the time to look that sort of thing up and you just want to make a video like that on TikTok, you like these children that were horribly traumatized, they made this documentary that everyone watched. They literally said, like Chad said, that the reason why they made the documentary is because everyone is talking badly about their father. And they wanted to make it to tell people, like, no, my dad was not involved in any of this. And so, like, these children are going out there and, like, sharing their extremely traumatic details for, like, the public to revel over. Um, because that's the only way they can get people's attention so that they can try to get people to stop thinking that their dad is a monster when they know that their mom is one. And so it's like, is it really worth it for you to talk about that right now when these children don't want you to? And it's up to you, literally, like, just to the internet at large, your opinion does not matter. Like, nothing that you say will ever convince these children to change their relationship with their father. Like, so shut up. Like,
Yeah.
so why are you talking about it when you know that these are children that have been through one of the worst experiences you can ever go through? They don't, you shouldn't be talking about them like this. You should actually respect them as people and give them the privacy that they've never had for a second in their entire lives. But like that situation is a good example of like restorative justice. It makes people uncomfortable because Kevin was somehow involved in this family that had horrific abuse happening. It makes them uncomfortable that he's not in, like, he's not being punished in
Yeah.
some sort of a way. And it's like, I would rather these children have a parent that they can work towards having a relationship with and trusting again, and things like that, that feels horrifically, horrifyingly bad about everything that happened to them and things like that, and is willing to try to, like, try to have some hope of that situation getting better when there isn't with their mother. I would rather them have that than for them to have nothing. And so we're never the, I'm usually the one that, like, makes people upset because I say stuff like that, because no, I don't think that somebody going to prison makes anything any better. And like, the honestly, the storyline of Luke is somebody that had a lot of chances to get better, or, like, rehabilitate himself, stop what he was doing, and he purposely, at every chance that happened, chose the other way. And, like, I found that old quote from Rick Riordan on Goodreads from, like, 2012, where somebody asked him, like, would Luke, like, do you think that Luke would be reincarnated, or that he would have another chance to, like, live a better, to, live, like, a better life, or make better decisions, or whatever, if he got another chance to live? And Rick was like, I hope so. And he's like, without, like, sounding, like, religious about it, that's always kind of the hope, that you realize that, like, that you could have redemption. And he said, like, it's always sad when people don't, like, do that. They don't take the path of redemption ever, and you have, like, no choice. But, like, you always hope that they're going to change their mind. And
Yeah.
that's, like, the whole thing with Luke, is that him deciding to kill himself at the end is not redemption. It was just like, I lost, so I might as well, like, take myself out now. Bye.
Yep.
And but, like, he purposely, like, there's so many different times that he could have made a different decision, and he actively chose not to. And that doesn't mean that every other kid that joins him, they realize that they made a mistake, and they are welcome back, and by camp, and people have to work through how they feel about that stuff, and not everybody agrees. It's obviously a traumatic thing. Everyone's going to have different feelings about it. um, but it is, like, a storyline in those books that most of the people that were on his side realized, even by the end, that it wasn't what they thought it was, and that they didn't really want to do it. But some of them felt like they didn't have a choice, because they didn't know how else to get what they needed in that world, but to try to, like, be on his side. And so it's like, he's, like, the one example of somebody, he's not, like, it's not the norm. Like, my dad is not the norm. My
Yeah.
dad is also not the norm. Like, that's not normal. Like, to have somebody that is, like, or, like, Jody or and Ruby are not the norm. Then, like, most abusive parents don't even go that far
Hmm.
when it comes to, like, their children, where they're actually, like, you know,
Torturing them. Like,
torturing them. It usually doesn't get as far as that. And so, in this sort of a story, though, that is the character of Luke, is somebody who does go that far.
yeah.
And that's honestly, our president is another example of somebody like that. And
Yes.
so, he's a Luke is a good example of kind of showing the kind of person that can go down that road, and how they use, like, other people's empathy and things like that to try to get away with what they're doing.
Hmm.
And it's like, you can't really use that stuff then if they're using it as, like, a weapon against you. I no longer consider it a reason to, you know, to do that. Like, my dad used to say stuff like that, like, to me, of like, oh, I've had a really hard life, and it's like, what do you, go away. Like, but it's just like, it's like that sort of a thing. If he would say that kind of thing to me to guilt me into talking to him, when most of my life, after I was 18 especially, I never wanted to. And he would say that kind of stuff, or, like, play, or, like, threaten, like, my mom or my sister, to get me to talk to him still when I didn't want to. um, and that's, like, how that stuff would work with those people. Like, um, the whole Oval Office, like, video,
Hmm.
what that was going around everywhere with Zelensky. I watched, like, 3 seconds of it, and I was like, that's enough. Because that reminded me so much of my dad, that it was, like, scary just to watch that little bit of him saying to him. All I saw was him say to Zelensky, like, why aren't you wearing a suit? Like, you look bad. Why do you look bad? And it's like that stuff that they do to just like start railing on everything attacking you. Um, and it's like that sort of scene is like the stuff that Luke does of like in the beginning of Sea of Monsters when they run into him for the first time and he's like, "You're making a joke out of Thalia," and Annabeth is like, "Why are you so stupid?" And he's just like saying all these like ridiculous things. Even like him saying to Percy like, "The you're not like the golden age is about to like begin and you're not going to be a part of it," and it's just like that sort of like everything he says to Percy from the end of the first book on. He's just trying to think of the things that will hurt him the absolute most to the very end, because the reason why he asked Annabeth, do you have you ever loved me, is because he's trying to hurt Percy. The
Yeah.
dude has lost. He's about to kill himself. He has basically killed himself. He's just waiting to die. And even at that moment, he's trying to hurt Percy, to have Annabeth be like, "Actually, I always cared about you more." And she's like, "Actually, no." And after that, he's like, "Well, I guess I'll just die now. Bye." But like even at that exact moment when he's like dying and it's over and he's lost and he's admitted defeat and everything like that, he's still like trying to hurt him somehow. Um, that's just how people like that are, and it'll be. It's gonna be really hard to watch like Charlie do that stuff, especially like the scenes with Annabeth, and not like have that bleed into just how I associate him with that. Because that's what happened with Adam Driver. I cannot look at Adam Driver's face or like hear his voice because of him playing Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
Um, it
I
didn't
mean,
help that the movie he did after that was a movie where he screams at his wife all the time in the clips that I see on TikTok, the Marriage Story movie.
the Scarlett Johansson one, I feel like I've seen clips, but I haven't seen it.
All I see is like that one sound um, that goes around TikTok every once in a while, and it's literally just them just screaming at each other. That's all I've ever seen of that movie is the two of them and him just like screaming, like vein bulging out of his forehead, screaming so much. And so like that doesn't help that like stuff either. But it's gonna be super intense for everybody filming all of this stuff. It's gonna be really. I'm just like picturing like 10-year-old little Nico, like whoever that child will be on set around all these like teenage characters that will just be like staring off into the distance trying to get ready to film like these super, like poor Walker. Every single scene is like super intense, super like emotionally damaging. There's no like jokey scenes. It's just like every scene is really hard and I have to figure out how to show this on my face. This is going to be interesting, but that's like every scene that he does that entire season. He's just gonna have to figure out how to do that and like interact with the other cast members at the same time. It's gonna be hard, but it's gonna be like that for Leah and for Charlie too. And so it's gonna be really great, but it is funny that as soon as they announced that, everyone just started celebrating.
Yeah. We're all like, yes, you don't need to actually announce it. We'll take this.
Yeah. And truly like Titan's Curse is so like intense and like complex and stuff that you could do like an entire podcast just on that one book, because there's so much happening in it that I feel like we're just always going to somehow come back to talking about it in some way, because there's just so much like
Not
the
good.
and especially like for the people who like the show, like they don't know that much about the books, going from like Sea of Monsters to Titan's Curse, where two of the characters that are introduced are murdered on screen, is going to be like a lot, because on a show like this, it's kind of a weird thing with shows like this that you don't expect people to die. Um, and in like one book, two main characters die.
Yeah.
And so you're just like,
Shit. Yeah.
what?
It-
Like, what? And then they're also like literally debating about killing Percy at like the very end of the book. And so it's just that's just like okay. Like that's just really intense.
Yeah.
Um and it does set up to the rest of the books really well. Obviously, there's much more death that happens after that. Um, that is Luke's fault.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so we should probably move on to Song of Achilles because we both have lots of really interesting feelings about that. Like,
Yeah.
one thing I want to say before we start is I was like laughing remembering how when we are reading books that we like or watching things that we are like enjoying, that the majority of these things of our videos are us talking about that thing because there's so many things to like analyze and stuff like that. But like when we listen to Epic for the time that we did, and when we listen, and now when we're reading this book, it's like it's more like at the end because we're like, you're annoying me.
Yeah. So there's definitely some things I like and some things that I hate about this book. One of my mutuals that came on last time, we had a mini conversation about it where he was talking about the male gay stereotypes in it, because these chapters we read for today, I feel like Achilles is giving, like the stereotype of a gay male who gives zero shits about women. And Patroclus is kind of the opposite of his communion or his community. His companionship is women. Like he doesn't really get along with men, and so they're opposite sides of the stereotypes that go along with gay men. And yeah, the whole thing feels like just a woman's fantasy of what a male relationship looks like. So to catch everybody up to where we are at, they're at Troy. They have been doing raids. We got to about 4 years in, and then we get a time jump here because Chryseis does not happen until 10 years, and this we're opening up with the whole Chryseis thing, which is also the opening of the Iliad. So it took us this long to get to this book, which is the basis of how most people know Achilles, which is interesting to me. But anyways, we get this time jump. We get so they have started taking out as many women as they can. Maybe not every single one of them because we know other men are getting slave women. But every time there's a girl up on the die, they call it, but like the little pedestal where they put all of their prizes and pick from them, Patroclus will be like, hey, Achilles, I want that one. And Achilles will be like, okay, I'm taking her. And so then they'll bring them back to their tent. They have this little community of women that they're putting together that don't get essayed every night like the rest of the slave women. And like that's the extent of it. And so when they started setting this up in Song of Achilles, there was part of me that's like, this is going to be really fucking awful when Briseis gets taken, because I knew that the whole, whether or not Agamemnon is going to fully take his prize, so to speak, is going to be a question. And I don't know whether I'm going to believe this Agamemnon when he says he didn't, because that is something that is a part of it as well. So anyways, to kind of lead us into these chapters, as I said, we start off with Chryseis coming into the camp. And Chryseis, Patroclus is saying he automatically knows she's someone important because of the way that she is adorned. She has stuff in her hair. Let's see, it says, what does it say the thing about what she was wearing? Ribbons fluttering from her hair, ceremonial fillets that marked her as a servant to a god, a priest's daughter, I heard someone say. So they automatically know this is someone special. And before they can do their thing and claim her because they see this girl crying, they're like, we're going to save her. Agamemnon's like, actually, I'm taking this one. And they kind of had a bad feeling about it. Patroclus even notices that their seer, Calchas, is making a face as he's taking him, but he doesn't say anything. And it says barely a month later is when her father came in to ransom. Again, this all happens in the Iliad pretty similarly. He comes, ship full of gold, says, I will give you all of this. I just want my daughter. Mm-hmm. And Patroclus talks in this book about how there's a certain protocol when it comes to these. There's rules of engagement when it comes to war. there's certain things that if you do them, even if this is your enemy, you're going to look like a bad person. And so they know that when Chryseus' dad, Chryses, comes, all of these names are fucking confusing for everybody, by the way, not just you. Like, not just you guys listening, but we have Briseus, Chryseus, and Chryses now. So Chryses, who is the priest of Apollo, her dad comes, ship full of gold, says, I want my daughter back. But he's not bowing down to Agamemnon. And we already know Agamemnon hates that shit because Achilles didn't bow down either when he was like, I'm joining you on the expedition to Troy. Mm-hmm. So, what Patroclus notes is that suppliants seeking ransom knelt and begged. They did not speak like kings giving sentence over court. But because this guy's a priest, he could get away with it. The gold he was offering was generous, twice what the girl was worth, and a priest's favor was never something to scorn. So he's basically saying, like, yes, this guy isn't approaching the way Agamemnon would like, but he's still within the realm of, like, protocol. Mm-hmm. And so Agamemnon should, in this case, be like, yes, I will give you back your daughter. But no, he says, I don't want to. You're not going to speak to me like that. Get the fuck out of here, dude. Basically, it's like, you didn't beg me, so go. And immediately, we see a plague happening. First to the animals. All of the animals start just, like, foaming at the mouth and dying. And then men start falling ill. And they're basically, like, burning bodies left and right at the point where Achilles finally has to be like, why is no one saying anything? Clearly something's happening, and his pattern recognition goes off. Mm-hmm. Also, the pattern recognition, they had already started doing things to prevent illness in themselves, which is 100% Chiron. They were following the protocol that Chiron gave them.
Yeah, this part was interesting, I thought, because of how the guy says that he's a priest for Apollo. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, it's interesting that none of the characters in this story, like, are like, maybe we should think about this. Because they already had, like, problems with the gods.
They piss off the gods quite a few, even when they take down Troy. I'll tell you that story later.
Yeah. And it's just, I guess it's just really interesting to think about. It's the stuff I was thinking about during this part is that, like, I was thinking about, like, the morality, I guess is the best way to put it, of, like, war. That, like, later on in this story, you're supposed to hate, like, Trojans.
Yes.
And Hector and things like that. But it's like, well, you guys are doing this. Like, you guys took the daughter of a priest who was like a more privileged person in the society, mm-hmm. that wasn't doing anything to anybody and was very obviously connected to important people, and you took her when you knew that you weren't supposed to. Like, the other people you took were like poor people that you knew nobody would, get upset if you took them. You took somebody important on purpose to, like, throw it in their face. And so it's like, how are you, this is just the stuff that I always think about, is like, how can you sit there and be all upset about what the other side has done to you when you're doing things like this to them? Like, you're not any better. So mm-hmm. Can you, like, get down from a literal horse that you're on, and stop acting like this? Like, yeah, this is a war. You're doing horrible things to them too. And it's that whole thing with, like, war always is that they try to justify what they've had to do to the other side. But it's mm-hmm. like, it never actually works that way, though. Like, you're literally here because a girl ran away from home, basically, and you're here because you think that it's a way for you to be rich. That's the reason why you're actually here, is because you just want to make money. And now you're doing these atrocious things in order to make money? Like, at least, like, the Trojans are like, well, you guys are at our house. You're literally in our city.
It's a show of power. It's 100% like piss contest. And they're also trying to, I don't think that they never explicitly say this. And this is one of the things where it's like, I know that this is written by somebody who doesn't care about the war aspect of this war. But you want to starve your enemy who's in a citadel, and you are outside of that citadel, of their resources because they have to cross you to get out.
Mm-hmm.
So like it makes sense to go after all of the surrounding cities that may be their allies. It 100% makes sense, but they never say that, and it 100% looks like, well, we're bored, and they're not coming out to fight us yet, so we're gonna fight everybody else around here.
Yeah, it's literally like, well, we're here a lot longer than we thought we would be, and so why not like fight some bitches and steal some people, and it like very aggressively blows up in their face very effectively
Yeah.
by the thing I liked about this plague was how it was like very militarized in the way that it was like attacking like the people that weren't that important, so that to like push the important people to like have to be the ones to make a decision because everyone else around them was just like falling down and dying and like puking and all these horrible things were happening to them. And so instead of, it's like that whole thing of like it would be easier if some of them got sick, but instead they have to watch it happen to everybody else, which means that they're like the pressure of people seeing that happening and nobody doing anything to help them just gets stronger and stronger. And I was like, this is kind of a fun way for Apollo to get back at them, is to basically like force them to do something by making them have to watch this and know that that reaction is going to happen pretty quickly.
Yes. So the pattern recognition is what I want to call out when it comes to this whole thing, because we know that from the Iliad, Achilles is the person who calls the meeting when it comes to this plague. He's the first person to be like, "Hey, something's going on. We need to figure out what's going on. My mom says there's something going on. Let's figure this out, guys." But in this one, we find out the reason the reason that she attributes to Achilles during this is because, he's this savant in the pattern recognition of, hey, everybody's dying but the kings. And this happened after that weird thing with the ransom. Why don't I ask my mom? and then we find out, yes, that was indeed it. And I also want to call out this sentence because this is how I know Madeline Miller has translated some shit. She put a double, like, it's almost a triple metaphor into a sentence. And I'm like, this does not work in English. If you were translating this out of Latin, you would be like, oh, I like what they did there. You read it in English, you're like, this is the craziest fucking sentence I've ever read. They looked pale and hunted. Hunted. So that's one metaphor word. Fearful of plague arrows. And she says plague arrows with hunted and with Apollo, right?
Oh yeah.
So they looked pale and hunted, fearful of plague arrows that sank in their chests. So think arrow shot to the chest. But then she switches to sank in their chest like stones in water. So you went from an arrow metaphor to stones in water. And then she says that spread their rot as ripples. And it's like, girly, you're doing too much with this metaphor. Because first we got arrows and hunting, and then we got stones in water, but they're connected through hitting the chest. What?
Calm down.
Yeah, that's how I know this girly actually has done some translation work, because that sounds like some shit you'd read out of Virgil and be like, this is amazing, but it doesn't work in English.
Oh, I just remembered something that has nothing to do with Song of Achilles, but I just want to remember it before I forget. The article I sent you where I just wrote no, and it was about like Christopher Nolan's Odyssey movie that he wanted to cast Robert Downey Jr.
Oh my God. Excited.
I'm just dying. I can't even say it without laughing. But I just saw that. I was just like, what is going on? I've seen so many like classics people like with videos lately talking about how the one picture they showed so far doesn't make sense at all with like costumes that is from the completely wrong era, and it's just like the only costume that Hollywood ever uses in like old time movies.
They don't know anything but red horsehair plume.
It's just, it is already so funny that Matt Damon is going to be Odysseus, but Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Christopher Nolan. I know that you're Christopher Nolan, but that was so funny.
Let's see. So, anyways, we have Achilles doing his amazing pattern recognition because he's such a great savant. But then the next thing we know, he decides to call a meeting, and this is how it happens in the Iliad. He calls the meeting because he's like, some shit's going down, and we need to figure this out because people are dying. And Agamemnon is, of course, feeling challenged once again because Achilles is the youngest king there. He shouldn't be the one calling the meetings. The only reason Achilles had to do it, though, is because Agamemnon didn't. Um, let's see. And so, yeah, Patroclus mentions that. He should have called this meeting long ago himself. He knew it. He could hardly rebuke Achilles for doing it now, especially with the men watching. And this is the rub that Madeline writes between Achilles and Agamemnon, because although we do know the humiliation is the thing that is his thing against Achilles, even in the Iliad, the way he does it here is just so much different. It just feels different because this is baby savant Achilles who can never do any wrong. Um,
Yeah.
let's see. So I'm going to skip ahead a bit to he calls forward Calchas, the seer, because he's saying clearly something divine's happening here. Let's get some. Let's try to figure this out. And Agamemnon's like, okay, let's call the seer in. Calchas, what's going on? Calchas is like, I'm a little afraid to say what's going on because it involves somebody. And Achilles. So this change I do not love. What Achilles says is, hold on, Calchas, we are dying. This is not the time for such fears. What man amongst us would hold your words against you? I would not, even if you named me as the cause. Would any of you? And then the men all shake their heads. And he says, you see, no man would ever harm a priest. First of all, he's saying that literally after Agamemnon harmed a priest. And then, second of all, here, we're going to read the actual, like, and this is not to say that the actual is inherently better just because it's, from the Iliad. This is to say that giving Achilles some nuance actually makes it more interesting. Because when he's protecting Calchas, he says, so Calchas says to Achilles, you order me to explain Apollo's anger, the distant deadly archer. I will tell it all, but strike a pact with me. Swear that you will defend me with all your heart, with words and strength of hand, for there is a man I will enrage. I see it now, a powerful man who lords over all of the Argives. Blah, blah, blah. And then Achilles says, courage out now, Calchas. Reveal the will of the god, whatever you may know, and I swear by Apollo, dear to Zeus, the power that you pray to, Calchas, when you reveal the god's will to the Argives, that no one, while I am alive and see the light on the earth, no one will lay his hands on you by the hollows of the ships. So Achilles doesn't say, like, hey, none of us want to kill you. He says, I will personally make sure nobody hurts you if you say this. And that, if you want to make Achilles, your hero, the one that people want to stick to, the one that people want to be behind, having him personally defend Calchas would be a great example. Having him personally defend Iphigenia would have been a great example because that's written into the play Iphigenia at Aulis, where he knows that, like, he finds out later they're going to kill her, and he's like, no way, you're not doing this when you said she's going to marry me. I'm protecting this girl because you said she's going to be my wife. Mm-hmm. Those are much better ways to have him stick to his morals, stick to his purpose, stick to what he believes in, than whatever the fuck this is.
I laughing, but it's because it's absolutely true. Like I like Star Wars is one of my favorite things. So obviously, I don't have a problem at all with people talking about war and how it like pushes people to do things that they normally wouldn't do. I find that actually really interesting.
Yes.
And so that's like the thing with this book is that it is involving a huge war, but they basically almost act like it's not really happening by like the characters like Achilles, like you said. It would be much more interesting if, because that's the kind of stuff that people would actually do in these sort of situations. Like, not everybody who joins the military is like a horrible person. Most people are not. They just join it because it's a way for them to like get away from home, like go to college, have like a life when they don't have a support system that they otherwise would be able to get that as easily somewhere else. And so like people, good people can be involved in like horrible things, and they can try to like figure out ways to like not completely lose who they are and things like that, while also, you know, being in this very difficult position. And so Achilles doing things like that in the Iliad is a good way for him to still like be like, okay, I'm supposed to be a hero, but I'm also involved in this huge battle, so I have to do some things that I normally wouldn't do, but I don't want to completely lose my entire identity. And so I try to figure out a way to navigate through this stuff, deal with like people whose egos are even bigger than mine, and like try to get what we need without like stepping on too many toes that it goes like too far. um, that's way more interesting. In this version of the story, it's like even like the stuff with like Achilles being like, I have pattern recognition. I'm like, you have eyes. Like
Yeah.
sometimes when I see like autistic people be like, I have pattern recognition, I'm like, you're just a breathing person.
Yeah.
Like, can we not
Sometimes
like
it's obvious and everybody can see it. Sometimes really only you guys can see it. It
yeah,
really
and it's
depends.
like the pattern recognition stuff are the things that are not quite as overtly like the amount of people that have been like, I see pattern recognition ever since Trump became president. I'm like, you have a brain. Like the pattern recognition stuff was the stuff that was leading up to the election, and the way that people were responding to things in the news and things like that that would show that the election results would go the way that they were. That's when the pattern recognition stuff was happening for other people, or just how people talk about like disability and things like that since 2020 that would lead to this sort of thing happening, to disabled people, like things that are being that have been done to disabled people now happening to normal people, and normal people acting like it's never happened before because they haven't thought about what disabled people go through before, like everything with like vaccines being taken away and how people talk about autistic people because of that, for example, or like putting us in, wanting to put us into like camps. That's something that does actually happen to not only autistic people but other disabled people. They just want to throw us away somewhere so that you don't have to see us anymore. That was literally most of society, and still happens in some way. Like the troubled teen industry is another example of that happening, like now still. And so it's like these things happen. That's the pattern recognition. Achilles being like, I am seeing everyone around me fall over, like with like blood squirting out of their like face and mouth and stuff. It's like, it's literally like a cartoon. Like imagine like a guy standing there with like mucus and blood and guts all around the floor and being like, I think something is wrong here. And it's like, you think? Like, you think? Thank you. Do you want a cookie for like your brain to be working correctly? And like, so the fact that this book is like, Achilles is so smart because he figured out that something was wrong, and he went to go talk to his mother because apparently he can't figure out that something is wrong without talking to his mom first. Like,
Yeah.
obviously there's something wrong. You don't need to talk to your mom. Your mom can just tell you which god is trying to kill everybody right now. But it's obvious that that's what's going on here. And it's just the like the way that she writes like autistic people in this book as if like we're tiny little baby birds, and that nobody can ever hold us responsible for anything. Like Achilles is like somehow smarter and does things that nobody else can do, but also is also like an innocent baby bird that can like literally murder people's entire family lines, and you're not allowed to be upset with him. And it's just like, I don't know what's going on, but I really don't like this. I don't like how it's being like written, because autistic people can be fucking assholes.
Well, and I want to compare and contrast them more because, like I said, like Achilles comes out looking more interesting in the original because he's not just one-sided. Like I am seeing no character, like development at all in this Achilles. The Achilles in Homer, however, okay, so Calchas does the same thing that he does in this book. He says, you need to give Chryseis back, no ransom, do a sacrifice. Says that to him in the Iliad too. And in this one, he's just like, fuck that. I want this girl. I'm not giving her back. In the Iliad, he's like so much more I prefer her by far to my own wife. He says that. I want her in my own house. I rank her higher than Clytemnestra. She's nothing less in build or breeding, in mind or in works of hand. So he basically was like, this lady's gonna run my house when I get home. That's what I want her for. Sorry, not Aeneas. Why did I go to the Trojans? Achilles then is like, look, you give this girl back, we'll all let you have your lion's share of the rest of the treasure for a while. Like, just give her back because we can't keep dying like this. Agamemnon still says no. Achilles looks more reasonable there, right? When you have Agamemnon saying, no, I just want this girl for a wife, and like, fuck all of you guys anyway. I'm not giving her back. Even with the promise of more treasure. And so when Achilles promises that, he says, like, you're trying to cheat me, Achilles, by saying I can't have this girl, and by saying you're going to give me treasure. I don't want treasure. I want the girl. And you know what? So if none of our generous Argives are going to give me a girl in exchange for having to give away a girl, I'm going to take yours, Achilles. And let's see, I'll command her, and I'll commandeer her myself, and let that man I go to visit choke with rage. Meaning, like, you, Achilles, I'm going to take her from you, and I want you to be super pissed at me. And this is where we see, so same thing happens in this book. I have to keep going back and forth because, hold on. It's definitely not as heated as of a situation before I get to that, but what happens next in the Iliad happens in this, which is Achilles reaches for his sword. And Patroclus is like, I have no idea why he backed off, but he backed off for some reason. Here's why he backed off, because Achilles goes off on Agamemnon while he's grabbing his sword. He says, you I hate most of all these rulers. Fuck you. Like, he's... hold on. I need to find it, because the way he says it, always dear to your heart, strife, yes, and battles, the bloody grind of war. What if you're a great soldier? That's just a gift of God. Oh, wait, sorry. Hold on. That's not it. Where is it? Fuck. There's a part where he's telling him, like, you just sit and watch us. Oh, shit. No, it's after. Okay, sorry. Okay. Have to back up a bit. So he grabs his sword. Athena's the one who's like, look, we like Agamemnon. We like Menelaus. You can't kill them. I'm sorry, Achilles. Just, like, don't. And so Achilles, he puts it back. And that's when he goes off on him. He's like, never once did you arm with the troops that go to battle or risk an ambush packed with Achaea's picked men. You lack courage. You can see death coming. Basically, like, you go on the battlefield scared to death you're going to die, and so you don't do shit. You're not fighting with us. And yet you think you deserve a girl? You think you deserve to take one of our girls? Fuck you. Like, that's what Achilles does. And I'm stressing this so much because to go from this
to that
to this, like, okay, so what happens in this exchange? Achilles says, let's see, he says he doesn't mean to dishonor him. He's like kind of placating him while fucking with him at the same time. And it goes over badly because Agamemnon is a stubborn asshole. And that rings true in this as well. So Agamemnon's like, you know what? You're going to have to learn your place because you didn't beg me either. And so I'm going to take your girl. Achilles is like, look, you can't take anything from me because I'll just stop fighting. Agamemnon says, is that a threat? Achilles says, no, it's not a threat. It's just what's going to happen. And Agamemnon says, we should have left you where we found you, in your mom's skirts. Which, like, he's trying to play up the, because
you had to dress like a girl.
Yeah, he specifically mentioned feeling humiliated when Achilles keeps doing this shit in this book. And so he's doing it back. He's like, I'm gonna humiliate you by effeminizing you, which is very, very bad in this ancient world. Achilles is like, let's not change the subject, Agamemnon. It's still about you. Um, and let's see. So he basically out at some point is like, I'm gonna take your girl, and Achilles is like, okay, bet, go ahead and take her. And Patroclus is watching all of this in horror because we know Patroclus is the one who's built the relationship with Briseis. Even though Patroclus thinks that they're this newfound family, they all sit by the fire with each other and love each other and, sing kumbaya. Achilles doesn't feel that. Achilles doesn't care about her. Achilles doesn't care about any of these women he's been saving. Let's be real. Like, that's the impression that I'm getting, because Agamemnon's not only promising to take Briseis in this version, he's like, I'm going to take that gaggle of girls he got. I'm going to take them one at a time, starting with the one that I know is the most valued in that group. And yeah, so Patroclus freaks out. Patroclus freaks out because Patroclus loves her. He has built this relationship with her. They've talked about how they could potentially be an end game for each other, even though he's like, no, I love Achilles too much. Like, it's giving Bella Swan with like Jake in that book of just, this is a potential other ending for me. I really do love you, but no. And so then the men come for Briseis. Patroclus has to tell her, but he's dreading telling her because he knows, like, I'm sending you to the fate that I tried to save you from. I'm sending you to be with these men. These men only want one thing from these slave girls that they're taking, and I don't want that to happen to you. But she kind of bravely just goes with them. And in the next chapter, we have some of that angst that Patroclus feels, like knowing what's potentially going to happen to her. And this is where I can't help but feel a little bit of myself in something that he said. And this is just, he has the worst self-esteem possible, because while he's going through it, while he's like, we got to figure out a way to save Briseis, to figure out how nothing can happen to her, he says, I imagine myself tearing down our tent, smashing the lyre, stabbing myself in the stomach, and bleeding to death. I want to see his face, Achilles' face, broken with grief and regret. And, like, it's one of those things when you've had so much shit happen to you and your self-esteem is on the floor and you really want somebody to feel what you're feeling, that you're like, you know what? If I have to die for people to feel this, so be it. And it's not a great headspace to be in, and I hate that Patroclus, despite finding himself in the medicine tent, still has that really bad self-esteem.
Yeah. And, well, this story doesn't, like, let him, like, it feels like it, like, keeps him at that place because, like, to be honest, if he had better self-esteem, he probably wouldn't want to be with Achilles anymore. With the way that they're being, with the way that they're written, at least in this book, it's very weird. Because people talk about how much they love them, but I'm like, this is like a toxic relationship, especially like this part of this interaction. But I do have to say that the way that like Patroclus is like so upset about this happening to the girl that he cares about, but then in like the chapters that we read for last week, he was talking about like, oh, look at how these other girls are like finding partners and like building families, isn't this so great? And it's like they are all being raped this way. Like, newsflash, this is how you should respond to this happening every single time. Not only when it's somebody that you personally know. Like, every single girl in this camp is being treated this way. You care about the one girl that you actually care about, but you will sit back and let it happen to everyone else. And not only that, but also romanticize these relationships of this happening to the other girls in this camp. And I'm like, am I not supposed to notice this? Am I supposed to be a fucking hypocrite along with these other characters? Like, rape is bad no matter who is being raped. like news at 11. And so like these girls are being raped all the time. And so it just felt like this like ridiculously over dramatic like farce in a way to me, because it was like you guys care so much about this one girl but you don't care about any of the other girls that are going through the same thing. And there isn't like any of the discussion like you read from the original Iliad where like they acknowledge the fact that they can't help everybody, but this is like some of the people that they can try to help because these are the people that they have some sort of like control over, so they can try to protect them from the rest of like the camp. And to say, I don't know what to call it where they are, but like that's understandable that you can't like be everyone's hero, but there isn't any of that stuff in this book. They don't ever talk about that. They don't talk about like this would be the perfect time for Patroclus to realize like, yeah, all the girls that are in this camp with us are going through this. Why didn't I care about that much, except for when it's somebody that I care about like this? But it just is so much just about this one girl, and there isn't any of that sort of like discussion happening, and it's just like so weird for me to read, to see like them being it felt like, I don't know how to like describe that, but it just felt like, even though you would think like, oh, this is like a multi-chapter sequence of like two men wanting to like help like try to stop a girl from being like raped or assaulted or hurt in some way, and I'm like, this feels still like weirdly misogynistic in the way that it happens, that they're like making everything about her being about that happening to her, and it's not actually about her, like her. Who is Bryceus? Who is she? Like, who is she as a character? Who is she? Like, what does she think? What does she want? What is her personality? All you know about her is that she comes from a farm and that she learned some Greek words. And that she's teaching Patroclus about how to notice like the natural like plants and things like that in the forest around them, that she knows from being a farmer. But literally her entire character is just, she grew up on a farm. You don't know anything about her thoughts, her opinions, her beliefs, nothing. You don't know anything about her.
Yeah,
and the thing that you know most about her is that she's supposed to be raped. And that is literally all you know about her. And I'm like, this is a joke to someone like me. This is a joke that they make such a big deal about saving her, like acting like if she crosses like this supposed like barrier and is like raped by Agamemnon, then like that is like the place that she can no longer like call back from or return to. And like obviously rape is horrific and nobody should go through something like that. But it's the entire thing of like the idea that she's been at this camp for all this time and nothing like that has ever happened to her. And that like just it feels like the like weird obsession with like virginity sometimes in stories like this. It feels like another example of that like they're acting like if she goes through that experience, that will somehow be like the trauma that like makes her like sullied or bad, or that she's somehow like ruined or destroyed by that happening. And when the thing that you know about her is that she was like kidnapped from a farm and was like taught words about basically how to stop somebody from hurting her by her dad, and that she's been in this place for at least a decade at this point. And so it's like you think that that's the thing that's going to kill her. She's been around these men for all these years, but you think that Agamemnon's like dick is the thing that's going to like take her out. Like this is just like ridiculous. And that's what I mean by like when I read stories like this, I'm just like, you didn't actually do research about what this sort of thing is actually like, or like what people who experience this sort of stuff actually do, even just trauma stuff. Because if you did, she wouldn't have written it in this sort of way, because it just doesn't feel real. I know that sounds weird for like a story that's
I get
fantasy related,
but social protocol back in the day that's very different from ours. But she's a modern author, and she's already doing some stuff that goes against the grain of the ancient times by having this purely homosexual couple and stuff. So she very easily could have Patroclus, who has no survival instincts on the battlefield. Somehow, he could actually care, like
He could, or even so. The part we
Even
haven't
even if
gotten,
it's like I have to listen to these women cry at night and I hate it. Even if
yeah,
that's the extent of the care, he could at least have that sentiment.
yeah. And the thing that we haven't gone to yet is that like basically, this whole like back and forth thing starts happening where Achilles refuses to like kneel for Agamemnon,
Hmm.
and Patroclus has to go and do this very dramatic thing of like literally cutting his arm, his hand, and like putting himself out
Literally
there.
with his wrist.
Yeah, to get to stop like to get her to be free from Agamemnon, or just let at least say Agamemnon won't like physically, I guess, hurt her in
Well,
that way. I
and
guess.
here's what like we did not stop and give Achilles enough thought for what he was doing here. Patroclus does, but he forgives him too easily, and I know
Way too
you're going to get
easily.
on that. Yeah, so Patroclus, as you said, he goes to Agamemnon and he does this huge show. If he comes in with a knife, Agamemnon's freaking out, like, "Are you going to try to hurt me?" And then he slits his own wrist and he's like, "Look, I'm just trying to really get through to you, dog." Like, okay, so if you rape her, because you've taken her from Achilles, she was his prize, none of these men are going to respect you. They're going to, like, if you just hold her until Achilles does what you want him to do, you're going to look so much better than if you take his prize and then ruin his prize. Because then you could take anybody's prize and ruin it, and they're not going to fight for you. And he has a point. He has a great argument there for Agamemnon specifically. His manipulation of Agamemnon, I am behind way more than Achilles,
Mm-hmm.
minus the wrist cutting. That was a little dramatic. But, what we find out through this, and then through him going to Achilles later and, giving no fucks because he's still hurt and saying, "I did this thing," is that Achilles was wanting him to do the opposite. Achilles was wanting him to sully his prize, to essay Briseis. That is the big thing, because we're forgetting she's a person here when you say this, Achilles. That when you say you wanted Agamemnon to go through with it, so you had an excuse to kill him, you had an excuse to get back at him, Briseis is the one who would pay the price.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, like, that pissed me off.
Oh yeah, that was. I was like, I said to you earlier. I was like, Achilles is supposed to be a hero,
Yeah.
and this is what he's doing. That the only like morally gray thing he does in this entire book is that he is willing to let a girl be raped so that he can then use that as a way to like unseat somebody that he thinks is an asshole. Even if Agamemnon is an asshole, like that's the only thing that you can come up with of how to like get power. And it's not even necessarily that like you need to get power away from him in a way that like it's like affecting their battles necessarily. Like obviously this plague just happened, but it's more of just he pisses you off. Like he pisses you off personally. He wants you like the fact that Achilles will not just like kneel and do that if it means that this girl will not be hurt and that he will have and he can get like the upper hand against Agamemnon in some other way. He can use the fact that he did that as a way to like get the men on in the camp on his side, which would likely happen, to show that like he's not above that stuff. He'll do that to help you guys, and he'll try to help you the same way too, and things like that. Like he doesn't think about that. He doesn't do that. Instead, he's like willing to sacrifice this girl for his ego, for his reputation. Like I will say that like autistic people, we do the one thing that we do, and like this is like a this might sound like a completely hilarious like thing to bring up in this context, but just go with me on this. Is like the Kendrick Drake thing. So one thing that every autistic person does is that there are always people that we don't like, but we don't say anything about it for a really long time because we know that societally we're not it's not acceptable for us to talk about it. And so we have like entire like think pieces in our brains for like decades sometimes that we just like work on, and we're just like waiting for the moment that is like socially acceptable for us to say everything, and then it all just like comes out. And so to use like Kendrick and Drake as an example, Kendrick's never liked Drake. There are tweets from him in 2012 when Drake was in like other rap battles with other people, just
Mhm.
saying like I don't like him. And it was like that was like the only times that he would say stuff like that, because he knew that Drake was a huge star and he couldn't really get away with it. And even in this situation, Kendrick guested on a song where he like basically called Drake out, and Drake responded. If Drake never responded, like, and said like you write your best songs and come at me, bro, like that's literally what he said. If he never said that, none of this would ever have happened. But like Kendrick just put that first song out knowing that Drake would say that, and that's giving permission. Now he has permission to say everything that he wants to say, and he destroyed his career in one weekend while he was taking a break from writing his CD. And so that is very like autistic thing to do, is that you just kind of sit there and wait for the time when you're allowed to say the thing that you want to say, and people will actually listen to what you want to say. And so the idea that Achilles is autistic and he's willing to like he hates Agamemnon and he's like waiting lying in wait, and like this feels like the opportunity for him to finally be able to do what he wants to do and like stop him and hurt him and get him out of power, when in other times he couldn't do it, is otherwise fine when he's not willing to let a girl be raped in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just like I don't why do people like him in this book? Like what after this scene I was just like he's a disgusting human being.
He's just a really flat character at that too. Like there's no growth here, and maybe it happens after Patroclus dies. We haven't gotten there yet, but
Yeah,
uh,
it's just like he gets mad at Patroclus in this book because he does what he needs to do to save somebody's like life from being raped by Agamemnon, who is
yeah, and that
uh
fight was so
just
stupid. Wait, I have to get on that fight. So it is a thing in relationships. I will say this: there's a whole song Rihanna and I think it was Neo who she did the song with. It's called "Hate How Much I Love You" or something like that. The lyrics are "I hate how much I love you."
mhm.
Like I can't be mad at you. It makes me want to smile when I'm looking at you when I'm mad at you. Like it's a whole love song. It's a cute song. It really is. But it is a thing that happens where like the person that you're really in love with, it can be hard to be mad at them. It can be hard to stay mad at them. It's frequently a joke, like a meme that you'll see of when your girl's mad at you, but then you ask her if she's hungry, and then it's like,
Fine.
yeah, fine. It really is a thing. But here's the thing: is I still have those necessary discussions with my husband when I'm mad at him. We can still go to each other and be like, "Hey, that thing you did, you were kind of an asshole when you did that." And can we not do that again? That's
Yeah, like
still a thing in relationships.
the whole like I can't say mad at you thing is just to me, like I obviously don't do romantic relationships, but to me it's like if you have people that you love in your life, and they do or say something that if like a stranger or something like that would do that, it would bother you a lot more because you don't know them.
Mhm.
But when it's somebody that you're close to and that you already know, it's like, okay, this pisses me off and I'm going to talk to you about it so that this doesn't happen again, so that I can talk about why this makes me upset and everything. Um, but I don't, but like, because you love them and you have an established relationship with them, you're not just going to throw out the entire like friendship or relationship or whatever over this like one thing, in a way where like when you run into somebody that you don't really know that says or does the same thing, you're not going to give them that sort of like patience or whatever because you don't know them. But like in this sort of a situation, like Achilles is mad at you because you did what you need to do to save a girl that you care a lot about from being raped, when he is literally sitting back and wanting it to happen just because he doesn't want people to not remember him the right way. Oh, I'm going to die soon. And so my reputation is the only thing that I have like that's going to like supersede me after I die, and so I'm going to let this girl be like destroyed basically in the
Yeah.
context of this story. That's how they present it. I'm going to let this girl be destroyed so that I look better.
Mhm.
And it's like, are you seriously okay with a girl going through something like that so that you personally look better to the people around you because they don't know about this happening? and that it will make you look better because you get to be the one to take down Agamemnon. Like, what if you like help this girl take down Agamemnon? What if you give this girl a fucking knife and she stabs him and he dies? What if like literally anything else but you being the one to do it, so that you can say that you're the one that did it and you can get all of the like credit for it and things like that happen? What if literally anything else but that happens? It doesn't even occur to him. And it's absolutely insane that this book is like Achilles and Patroclus are such an amazing love story, and I'm like, do you only? This feels
We're only reading
homophobic, and it feels homophobic in the way that I feel like people say that about this story because it is a gay relationship that is canon in a story.
it's benevolent homophobia.
Yeah, like I don't think if they were written in any other way, if they were any other like genders of people, that anyone would like this book as much as they do, because it's literally like, oh, it's a book where they're canonically gay on the page, and so they're like letting all of that pass and just getting caught up with like the tragic end, but it's also just like they're acting like horrible people right now. Like Achilles is willing to sacrifice a girl just for his image.
Well,
And
okay, so here's where again, she's very much a classics major. You know, it very much shows because she's beating you with that classical lit 101 over the head with the hubris comment. Because what Patroclus says while Achilles is discussing this is so Achilles says you choose her over me when he's talking about you did this thing with Agamemnon. And Patroclus says, over your pride. And he says, I use the word hubris, like in the Greek, for pride, which is more about arrogance and stubbornness than it is about, like, you know, just digging your heels in like a good way. And so she's, because we know that that's Achilles' hamartia, his fatal flaw, his, you know, we know that that's it. We know from all of the other literature. So she's just, hey, this is the original story. Bam, 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 over the head with that hubris comment. And I don't love it. You know, I don't love it because the other hubris we're dealing with here is fuck you, Agamemnon. You fucking suck, and I want you to pay. What we're dealing with here is just, haha, why don't I clown Agamemnon? Oh no, you want to take something from me? I don't care, but I'm just gonna fuck with you until you give in anyways.
yeah, like I'll let you take whatever you want from me if it means that I can like basically unseat you later by making people get so angry at you that they like revolt against you.
Yeah,
And it's just
it's weird. It's not, it doesn't feel, it, it's like so off, it's uncanny valley off brand. That's what's getting me. And it's because of this insistence that Achilles is this innocent little baby child who's this fighting savant, just happens to be a fighting savant, can't do anything wrong. We don't have him getting actually angry in this chapter. We don't have any of that, like, even just anger that his prize got taken, even anger in the objectification sense.
dude, I was even like waiting for him to admit that he was okay with her being taken because he was jealous of like the fact that Patroclus and her
That
had
would
a
have
good
made more
relationship.
sense.
That would have made sense. I was waiting for him or Patroclus to realize that that was what was going on, that he was okay with that happening to her because he was jealous of how he was closer to her than any of the other girls, and they never even bring that up. And I'm just like, uh, I just, this is just so odd. Like your mutual that talked about this, that did remind me that there is like a whole thing that happens in publishing sometimes. There are a lot more queer people that are writing stories, thankfully, for themselves, so it doesn't happen as much as it did in 2011, but it is still a very like difficult, it's hard to get into publishing when you have any like marginalized identities. That's why Rick Riordan started his imprint, to try to help those people get like actual chance to like be published and get more of a career. Um, but which by the way, one of his imprint books came out recently, so you should look that up too. That came out last week. Um, but it's just a thing of like she's she's like a straight, I think, white woman that's like writing this story about two gay men, and she's the one that's like showing what gay relationships are supposed to be like, when I think it's evident when reading this story that she didn't, even if you are not the thing yourself, you can like take the time to like understand and know people like that in a way that like makes the story that you're telling more real and like accurate to like how people actually are. Like there's multiple queer characters in relationships in Percy Jackson. Rick is not queer, as far as we know anyway. I don't think that he is, and so, but he's known people that are for many decades, and so he was able to write like Nico and things like that in a way that is actually accurate to how queer people are, like having crushes on people and then getting upset at them when you realize that you have a crush on them, and like even being forced to like tell people before you're ready like that you do have feelings for that person because you're afraid of how people will react and things like that. um and it's just, and that's a very like actually normal way that queer people realize that they're queer, is that they realize that they have like weird feelings for somebody that they don't understand why they're so upset at them, or why they're, or things like that. But there isn't the same sort of thing in this book, and it is like a strange thing that this book is like touted as like this amazing gay like love story, that people read this book and think that this is how gay people are. And I know, I've I one of my best friends for many decades was gay, and so I knew a lot of gay men, and a bunch of them like had relationships and dated and things like that when I was friends with him for a good like the last like 10 years before we stopped being friends. And they're not like that. It's not like so black and white where it's just like there are some of those issues that come up, but it's not happening in the same way. And especially in this story, the fact that the chapter ends, which is Patrick Lee's just being like, "Oh, I just can't stay mad at him." I'm like, this is like a toxic relationship. This is
Yeah.
like a toxic codependent relationship. Like he was willing to let a girl he knows you love and care about get raped viciously by a horrible person because he doesn't want to have to like stand down to him. Stand down to him, dude. Stand down to him for 10 seconds so that that doesn't happen. Are you kidding me? And he, like, the fact that he just like lets that go, and it just like, and I know that they're likely going to, you know, that they're going to move on from that in like the next chapter to whatever else is about to happen. um it's just, it's like he should be mad. And
Yeah.
like the idea that like Patrick Lee is being mad as this stuff is going on, and like the dramatic moment that everyone knows is coming, would make it more interesting. If like, what if he was upset? Like, what if he was upset at him, but he still like did the thing, because he still knew that he was a good person? What if they like never got to like have like a final conversation where they worked things out, which made that whole situation even more tragic than it already is? Or what if they were starting to work on like figuring all that stuff out, and then that happened, and so they never really got to. And it's just like there's so many other ways to make that as part of the story to make it even more interesting, instead of it just being like, well, the chapter's ending, so I have to stop being mad at him because of whatever happens going forward.
That was
I'm not allowed to be mad at him.
at the end of the chapter too. That's what felt very abrupt.
Hmm. It's literally like, well, okay, I guess since this chapter's over and we have to move on to the next plot point, Patrick Lees has to just magically stop being angry at him.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's just ridiculous. I don't even know. I just felt so weird reading all of this. And I was just like, I don't get why people like Achilles. In this book especially. In this book. I'm just gonna go with that. I don't know why people like him in this book.
I'm trying to find, because I'm pretty sure Achilles' motivation for wanting Briseis, for like being mad, is A, you're taking away my prize, but B, is because he like it. I think it was the first. Well, I mean that's true of Song of Achilles. It was the first girl he ever got as a prize, and like that's really special. And so for him, I think it was like I want to make this legit. Um, so to kind of tie this back into last week, you know who Ovid wrote a letter from? He wrote a letter from Briseis to Achilles. And what Briseus in this letter calls Achilles out on is eventually when, okay, so the next chapter, I'm going to really quickly summarize. The next chapter is Achilles knows his mom has a favor to cash in with Zeus and
Oh
wants
yeah.
the Greeks to continue losing and losing and losing so that they can feel the sting of him being away from battle. This is central to the Iliad too, so we know this plot already. And there's not really a lot more extra to it in Song of Achilles. It's 5 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in this one, however, like we know he goes crying to his mom. His mom's like, "Look, let me take care of this for you. I got you. Your life's gonna be so short. You shouldn't be sad." It gives boy mom. There's a reason why people call her boy mom sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I can give her the excuse of like he really is gonna die soon, so I get it. But she does cash in that favor, and that Thetis, of course, is so much nicer and prettier, and we love her. So I forget where I was going with this, but like it just feels a lot more hollow in this one. And I mean the other thing she inserts into this 5 page chapter that I'll just mention too is this is where we do get the back and forth with Agamemnon and Patroclus because Patroclus keeps going back to visit Briseis.
Mm-hmm.
And Agamemnon's like, look, you can visit her whenever you want since you gave me that helpful bit of information and I didn't go and do the thing I was gonna do. Um, so, um, yeah, we find out from Agamemnon. Oh, if Achilles just bows down, we find out from Achilles if Agamemnon just bows down, and Patroclus stuck in the middle with this poor girl being the victim. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's where we leave it at with these chapters. And so I was frustrated. I was frustrated on behalf of Patroclus. I was frustrated on behalf of Briseis. I was frustrated at Achilles because it's not the Achilles we know. The Achilles we know in mythology is very just and is very like yes, the hubris is part of it, but his hubris was it was because of like the insults of it. And yes, we get that here, but again, it's the off-brand version. It's the Wish version of that. It is the Timu version of that.
The Wish version.
It just doesn't feel right. Like, because you can say, like, I said it a little bit here and there with Epic. Like, yeah, some of the same things happen, but they take on a very different flavor in this story. And it's icky in this one. It's icky. There's something wrong about it. Not having Achilles. I mean, what is the first word of the Iliad? Do you know this? Do you know what the first word is in Greek?
Mm-mm.
Anger, rage. The first word is rage.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's a big thing in these epic poems in their original language that the first word is the theme of the epic. Rage is the first word of the Iliad. Man is the first word of the Odyssey because we're following one man's journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what was it in Arma? So weapons. It's weapons and war in Virgil's Aeneid. So like that was a big thing. Achilles being rageful is central to his character. It is literally the first thing we learn about him.
Yeah.
The very first thing is that his rage was so powerful that it devastated the Greek army for months. Where's the rage? Where's the rage? Queer angst is a thing.
Yeah.
Why
Very
is
much
this
so.
queer man not angsty enough?
We're very angsty people because queer is not exactly goes along with the
Oh
rest
my
of
gosh.
society most of the time.
Yeah.
And
So I don't know. There's parts of this I want to love, and like it was the same with Epic for me. There are parts of this I want to love, but when you want to change things so much that you're changing things for the sake of changing them, and the original characterization would actually further your story, I don't get it.
yeah, I don't get it. It's really weird. I get why people don't like this, like why some of the people that we know don't
Mhm.
like this book or stopped reading it because we would have stopped reading it if we weren't doing it for this.
Yeah.
Um, but it's because it is hard to read this sort of a thing happening a lot. And I don't know. It's very confusing to me always because Madeline Miller is very obviously like a talented writer,
Mhm.
just like with the prose and things like that. So I know it's not that she doesn't know, and I know from seeing like her blog going back to around this time that she would write blogs about Greek mythology in general. So it's not like she's, ignorant to anything. And so it's just weird to see them being depicted this way, and it like leading to the thing like I don't it feels like she's having like Achilles not be like vengeful or angry until he gets to like the end, and it's so like off the wall and like insane that it like to show like the difference. But it's also just like a thing of like you can do that and still show when somebody has is like being like pushed over the edge and
Mhm.
is like going too far. Like I get angry at things, but still, even if I talk about when I'm angry about something, people can tell when somebody has said something to me that's like too far,
Mhm.
because I don't give them any like patience at all, and I just like literally like rip them apart
Yeah.
and say like you've given me permission to be a horrible person to you because you've done something bad enough to me that I don't feel bad about that. That doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does.
Mhm.
And there's a difference though, and it shows like the difference of the kind of like rage you feel, where you feel rage in general and can show that you're upset, versus like when you reach a point where you don't care anymore of how about how somebody how you're treating somebody because they've hurt you so badly that you no longer care about how you're affecting them anymore. And that's just like a different level of rage that makes it more like intimate and personal and things like that. So you can show him being angry, and then but then also still show him being like livid. Like this is like a weird thing for me to talk about, because like talking about Percy Jackson stuff, because um, there is something that happens in the Last Olympian that is very much like the mirror of Achilles and Patroclus, like the moment, like the big dramatic moment.
Mhm.
Um, and it involves one of the characters it involves is somebody that shows that she's angry a lot and doesn't
Mhm.
have any problem showing that, but still that moment you understand like how bad that moment is. um, and all the people that are reacting in that moment, they've showed being angry and having rage before, but you're
Mhm.
still like absolutely beyond horrified when that thing happens the way that it does. It's not like absolutely the same. There obviously are different like things going on there, but it's similar enough that everyone knows that's what the inspiration of that scene was. And so like you're still like absolutely just horrified by how that scene happens and how it happens and who it happens to and things like that. You don't need the character that it happens to shows that she's angry before that ever happens to her. And so it's like you don't need it to be like that. You don't need to like hold it back in that way. You're still like over the top upset about that just reading it in like that version of that story, much less in like the Greek mythology version like this. And so I just like wish that she would like let them. I feel it's almost like, I don't know if it's like a thing of because of the times that this book came out in 2011, which was before gay marriage was legal, if she felt like she couldn't make them like flawed characters, and that if she did, that people would like attack them too much for being gay characters that were also like flawed people or
Mhm.
something. Um, because that was something that, and still sometimes happens, but it especially happened then, that like you didn't see that representation very much at all. So when people did get it, you felt like you had to like make them like perfect and things like that. So I don't know if it's something like that, but either way, they're just like lacking a lot of characterization, and the other characters around them are kind of lacking that too, because they're a response to them as like the main people of the story. And so I still enjoy, in theory, Madeline Miller as a writer. I am like weirdly fascinated to read Circe one day, because I do know that it took 7 years for her to put that book out. Like she
Mhm.
put out Song of Achilles and then didn't put Circe out until 2018. And
Yeah.
so that's a long time.
Mhm.
And so I'm like weirdly fascinated to see like what her writing is like in that book, and see if it would obviously have progressed during that time, but to see if like the
Okay.
things that showed up in this book are different
Yeah.
in like a way that we would enjoy like more. especially because a story like Cersei, you would have to understand like consent and things like that in a way that's not consistent in this story.
Yeah.
Um, you have to for a story like Cersei, especially like the trigger warnings that are out there for that story. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's just there's like things about it that I want to enjoy, but then things like this always happen, and it like makes it really hard for me too. And I guess it's weird to read a book that is all centered on a love story, and then by the time now we're getting to the end, I don't like them as a couple. I'm like, what? How did I get here?
They're not a sympathetic couple. You see it from the very beginning. Patroclus has no self-esteem. He thinks Achilles is a god. I have to keep comparing it to Twilight because that's Bella Swan too, right? Zero
Mm-hmm.
self-esteem, doesn't want anything for herself, doesn't care if she lives or dies, just wants the perfect person that happens to be in their sights.
Mm-hmm.
And it's boring. It's flat. Patroclus, despite, like I said in this discussion, like he found himself. He found a place where he's valued, where his skills are needed and necessary, and that does a lot for people like our self-esteem, where we've had it beaten down by our family situations or things that have happened to us in the past. The moment you get good at something and you receive some sort of praise for doing something after that, it helps knock that up a few points for most people, for most normal people. Patroclus, that doesn't happen. And then Achilles, he's flat in a different way of, yeah, I'm going to die soon, so why change? Why do anything different? Why be anybody different? I'm the best. I'm going to go out as the best, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. And even like Achilles in this part being like, you can't win this war without me, so I can basically
I
just
mean,
do whatever
that's
I
true
want.
too, but again, it doesn't hit the same because he's not
No,
mad while he's saying it.
no, and it also just doesn't hit the same because of who's being like harmed. Like, it's not Agamemnon that's being hurt by him doing that. It's like the men that don't have anything to do with anything,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like Briseus and the other like women that are being harmed by what he's doing. And so it's like a thing of like you get upset with him for doing that in this version of the story because you don't like seeing him hurt like the people that don't have anything to do with what's going on.
Yeah.
In the original story, it's more him like using that influence to like manipulate Agamemnon to get what he and the rest of the people there need when he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to give it to them. And so that's
Well,
not the
no.
energy of this
I
exactly.
mean, yes and no, because I would say he doesn't give a fuck about the men that are going to die
Yeah.
in the original either. But the difference is the anger. It's that he is that angry.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it's, he's meant to be more gray, I think, in Homer because you're meant to question, am I on his side or am I on Agamemnon's side? I don't quite like Agamemnon, but I don't quite like this thing Achilles is doing by not fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where your head's supposed to be. And, like, yes, we know that the war was all over a stupid girl who went AWOL, right? So we're not supposed to take anybody's side. It's supposed to be hard to take anybody's side here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
In this one, she's shoving it in your face. You need to take Achilles' side.
Yeah. Like
Agamemnon is a bad guy.
you need to take Achilles' side because Patroclus will like die
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, basically. And so since he's the person that the story is from, you're gonna take their side because that's it. Like, and it's just, yeah, there isn't any of like the grayness of like a war or a battle at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that there was because it would make it really a much more interesting. I think it would make it a much more interesting story for everybody involved if it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. It's always an adventure when there's like a really popular book. Actually reading it and seeing what you think about it because some of the time I really like it. Like, um, this is not at all Greek mythology related, but the Six of Crows duology is
Mm-hmm.
honestly one of the best like book series I've ever read. Like before we started reading books recently, that was the last book series I read and I was like, have I like peaked? Is there a better series that I can read right now? Those two books are so out of this world good, it's ridiculous. And I'm forever have a grudge against Netflix for somehow messing up that show and canceling it. When those characters are such good characters, it's like you actually have to put in effort to mess that up because of how good those characters are and how good the story is. And they somehow did that. And so when I read that book and those books, I was like, okay, this makes sense that this book is so huge and everybody loves it because this is such like it was one of those books where when I was reading like or listening to the audiobook, I would like stop because I would just be like, this is such a good book. Oh my god. I would have to like sit there and stop and like think about it because the writing in it was so good that I would have to like sit there and pause because I almost like couldn't handle how good the story was like, you know, being written. And so that's what I thought this book was going to be. So I'm so surprised that it's not. And
Yeah.
it's just it's very interesting to see because I've only ever seen positive things about Madeline Miller. So it's like just interesting how this actually feels when I'm reading it. It makes me so curious about the Cersei book because the thing I've always heard about her is like, oh, if you like tragic love stories, you would like Song of Achilles. If you've been hurt by men in your life, you would like Cersei. And so I was always like, I should probably read Cersei. And now I'm like, now I have to read Cersei because I am so curious about what that is going to be like
Yeah.
after reading this book.
Well, I want to get back to Percy Jackson after. I'm like,
Mhm.
I really
Yeah, I
want.
mean, after like many months from now, we'll read that. That's like another
Yeah,
like
because
adaptation book we'll read one day.
our lineup is probably already decided for us with how things are going. Because yeah, we'll finish this and then we'll switch back to the Percy Jackson series and do Battle of the Labyrinth. And probably by the time we're done with that, the second season will have already come out of the show,
Yeah,
or it will at least be coming out.
yeah,
So
we could even do a thing like I've seen people do this where they like rewatched like the first season to see how they feel about it now, sort of thing. We could
yeah,
do something like that, leading up to the second season coming out because that will come out at some point this year, obviously. Um, and and like sometime like the only thing I can think of when it comes to that is that the what am I saying? The 20-year anniversary for the Lightning Thief is June 28th of this year, and so I don't know what they're gonna do for that, obviously, but they have to be doing something. Like something has to be happening around that time. Because there's no way that they're gonna pass up the 20-year anniversary of this huge
no way.
franchise. So like I don't know if it's show related or book related or both or whatever. Something will happen then. And so either way, like that would be around the time that we would be reading this stuff anyway. I will say that like when we've been doing these things about different adaptations and stuff, it's always it's always like a breath of fresh air, like doing videos and stuff again about Percy Jackson because that fandom is just so much more fun to talk to or
Oh my gosh, yeah.
interact with. Even people that get upset, like Luke sympathizers and things like that, it's still a much more interesting like situation because you're like talking something out with them and they're willing to talk it out with you. And yeah, some of them just get upset and like you know
Yeah.
say that stuff, but they usually don't have to like block them. You never get I usually don't get like harassed longer than like a day, and
Yeah.
that's usually even with that I know I could stop it. I just know that it's a kid that's like hurt, and so I'm just like letting them do that with me for a while until they just like move on from it. It's not anything like what we've dealt with the other people we've been dealing with, so it's like it's always so weird to me that this one fandom has like the same ideas, the same themes, the same general stuff, but like that world you can like talk to people about things, you can disagree about things and it doesn't come off in like the same way. Like I like made response videos to like Mason's video. I could make like literally like 7 different videos about that one video that he did about Luke. I just stopped at 2 because I got tired of it. But nobody was in my comments being like, you shouldn't attack him, you're attacking him as a person and that's really unfair. And it's like, no, people do that kind of stuff all the time. Like people make videos talking about how we disagree about there's like people that there's like a group of people that make videos about Luke just like shitting on him all the time that I always like. There's even people in that group that have different opinions about different things, like different characters and things like that. And it's all fine. Nobody is like screaming at them about that or saying that they're not allowed to think that way or anything like that. And so it's just like such a relief to talk about that stuff again, because it's like, oh, this is like where we're supposed to be, because we can talk about all these things. And like even some people will listen to what we say and they'll like be like, oh, you're right about that. Like I've had like some people do that when we talk about like Artemis even, or Calypso especially, that they will be like, oh, I didn't even think about it that way. Or like when I did that one video about Luke and people started being like, oh, I never thought about how he like scapegoats Grover about that. It's really horrible to think that he did that to Grover when Grover's such a sweetheart and
Yeah.
things like that. It's like you don't have to like, you know, piecemeal it for them. They can figure it out by just thinking about it. And it's just wild how these other, like, at least these other things that we've tried to talk about, we do the same things, but the
Mhm.
like the response that we get is just is so different.
It's so different.
Even like the videos you've been doing, like laughing about the movies, like there'll be people in the comments that are like, I still like these movies though, and there'll be other people being like, my soul is being sucked out of my body every time I remember that these movies
Yeah.
exist. Like one of the people that follows both of us, it was so funny where when I asked like, why can Luke like float on water in this movie? It doesn't make any sense. And he's like, well, like one of the Hermes kids in like history could do something like that with air, so that's probably where they came from. And I was like, I don't think the people who made this movie were that smart to
No.
like know something about that. And he's like, you know what, you're right that they're not, but I just need to believe that for my own sanity.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, that's valid. And so there's like people like that, and then there's other people that are like, I still like this movie because I watched it a lot when I was a kid, and we can all like coexist together
Yeah.
without ripping each other's heads off. And so it's just, I don't know why the other, like I can like make an assumption about why the Epic the musical fandom is like that, and to sum that all up is the like extreme lack of boundaries.
Yeah.
Like there is no boundaries, like the way that people just, I don't know, it's just like I'm just like imagining in like a crazy fantastical like parallel universe that's just sad and depressing, that like Becky on Threads,
Mhm.
if she like, you know, shouts out like the people that she does, people that have been in the fandom for many years that she knows and things like that, that they've done interviews with,
Mhm.
if she saw those same people like harassing fans and said nothing, like that would never ever happen. Like if you ever want to interact with Becky Riordan, you can very easily on Threads.
Yeah. She
um
interacted with me before.
yeah, like if you ask her a
Interacted
question,
with you before.
yeah,
She literally
like
answers a lot.
she will like, she likes like every response to every post that she makes. She will like, she'll reply to you if you ask her a question. She will likely, she doesn't respond to every single one, but there's a good chance that she will. Like she was talking about today about, someone was asking about the Demigod Diaries book, and they were saying that the people involved with the show use it as like a way to write like the show and things like that, but that otherwise they don't want to, they thought about adapting those short stories, but they decided not to do that and spend their time working on other projects instead. And so like you can ask her things like that. Like I still think um like I don't like idealize like them necessarily in like the unhealthy way. Like I'm not going to like go out and attack somebody because I don't like Becky Riordan,
Yeah.
but or Rick or anyone else involved like in this production. But I will say that the day or a couple days after the election, I posted that video that I did about Medusa, and just like reading out like the things that Rick and Becky said about Medusa, and pointing out like this is the kind of empathy that you need in this sort of a time when people are going to be experiencing this more, and it's just going to be a lot harder. And I just literally like read out like quotes of things that they said in an article that I really liked that they did when the Medusa episode aired. And I just posted that on Threads. Like I didn't talk or like interact with her at all. And she liked that video, and I was like, I'm gonna die that like Becky Riordan of all videos that I posted saw the video that I posted talking about Medusa, and like Like when I recorded that, I had to like stop myself when I read her part because it made me like emotional reading how she describes Medusa, because that's exactly how you feel when you go through something like that. And so I was like, out of all videos for that I post, this is the video that Becky Riordan sees, just like going through the tag and like likes it without me interacting with her first. Like, Jesus Christ. And but it's just like a thing like that. Like, that's just nice. Like, that's normal. You're not. They're not. It's just always a very unhealthy like fandom sort of environment when there's like a hierarchy, but like the people involved in keeping it in check just don't keep it in check at all,
Yeah,
and they
like
just like
certain
let it run
people.
free. And it's like you can't interact with a fandom and then when they start misbehaving be like, I'm not
I
involved in
don't
any
see
of this.
anything. I'm not here.
And like